So you may have had your own interpretations of what those missing notes and the silence was in your lives. But it represents the more than 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States. My name is Ekene Ijoma, and I'm a 2017 Citizen Artist Fellow. As an interdisciplinary artist, I composed this work titled Deconstructed Anthems by systematically, algorithmically, repeating the Star Spangled Banner 6 times, each time removing notes at the rate of mass incarceration. I want to thank Chris Bowers, who arranged the music, and I want to thank Amy, Andrew, and Victor for performing the music, and everyone here for joining us in acknowledging and recognizing those who have been systematically removed from their families and communities, as well as those whose voices have been silenced. And okay, and yeah, and those who have been, whose system has failed them. Thank you.
Please welcome Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Kennedy Center, David Rubenstein.
Thank you all very much for coming today. How many of you have never been to the Kennedy Center? Anybody? A couple people? Okay. I have the honor and privilege of serving as chairman of the Kennedy Center. It's an organization that was created shortly after President Kennedy's death. And President Kennedy was given the honor of having this performing arts center named after him, in part because of his love of the arts. As some of you may remember, if you were around when he was president, he brought artists into the White House at a level and at a pace that had never been seen before. For the previous 8 years when President Eisenhower was president, there weren't as many artists, let's say, going to the White House. Eisenhower's interests were different. President Kennedy, spurred in part by his wife's interest in the arts, really brought artists to the White House who had never been there and who performed there at a level that really captured the country's attention. Perhaps the most famous concert was Pablo Casals. Pablo Casals was somebody who had refused to perform in the United States, in part because the United States had supported the Spanish government of Franco, but ultimately because of Kennedy's commitment to human rights and other kinds of things that Casals cared about. Casals came and performed for the first time in many, many years at anywhere, but certainly at the White House. And it was a classic concert that was well remembered. And people also may remember that at the beginning of President Kennedy's term, at the inauguration, he asked Robert Frost to speak. And he gave a stirring rendition of one of his poems. And many people thought how unusual for a president of the United States to want a poet to speak at his inauguration or to bring someone like Pablo Casals in. And of course, Kennedy brought all the living Nobel Prize winners into the White House for a dinner, which is when he famously said, this is the greatest assemblage of human talent that's been here since Thomas Jefferson dined alone. I would say, to be honest, President Kennedy was not somebody who was as in love with Beethoven or Mozart as he was with show tunes or with Irish ballads. There's nothing wrong with that. When Mrs. Kennedy was asked once, well, what is his favorite song, actually? And she said, well, to be honest, it's Hail to the Chief. When this building was constructed and opened in 1971, it was a massive building, and it still is. I think it's 1.2 million square feet, and it has 9 theaters in it now. This is one of the 9 theaters. It was a fairly imposing building, and it did what it was supposed to do. It did 3 things, really. It provided performing arts for the nation. It was the nation's performing arts center, and it brought performing artists from all over the world here. It specialized as well in arts education. One of the missions of the center was to do arts education, educate people about the arts, which is so important because increasingly We don't educate people enough about the arts, in my view, and obviously the view of the people who set up the Kennedy Center. And third, it was supposed to be a living memorial to President Kennedy. And so those of us who've got the responsibility now to live up to the ambitions that Congress set for us are trying to live up to those three goals: arts education, living memorial to President Kennedy, and a terrific place for performing arts. We've tried to modernize it, update it a bit recently. As some of you know, and I mentioned in remarks last night, we've been doing more that is, I'd say, hipper than what we have traditionally been seen as. So we have a hip-hop consultant named Q-Tip. I cannot say that I was involved in the selection of that, but he seems to be great. I listened to one of his performances, and he knows a lot more about hip-hop than I do. Some of you may know that for my business career, I was asked to do a rap song, and that's because my firm bought a company called Beats that had been a headphone company, and it had been created by Dr. Dre, who's a hip-hop artist. So they thought it might be nice if I did a rap song, and so they took me down to a studio in Washington. They hired a young African-American hip-hop specialist, 21 years old, in Washington, D.C., and they told him to write a hip-hop kind of song for me to sing. And he said at the beginning, Mr. Rubenstein, this will take 5 minutes to do. I've written it out. You just got to do this. Okay. 4.5 hours later, when we completed, he said, Mr. Rubenstein, you are the whitest man I've ever met. So, but in addition to hip-hop, what we're trying to do is make the place more inviting to people from all over the country. We don't want you to feel, and the citizens of this country to feel, that they have to have the money to buy a high-priced ticket, or they have to come only to hear opera or to hear Beethoven or Mozart. Not that those are not great things to do. One of the things in that direction we've tried to do is we're trying to modernize the building. It was built in a very imposing way, and now we're having an addition built on the side. Some of you will see it. A lot of construction cranes are going on forward. It's designed to have a part of the Kennedy Center that in the future will be more inviting to people. They can come during the daytime and spend all day there. They don't have to buy tickets. They can just spend time there. They can watch rehearsals. There's more rehearsal space, more places to eat, more places to connect to the water, the Potomac. There'll be a bridge over the highway so people can walk back and forth. And it's designed to be a place where people can actually enjoy just being around the performing arts and what the arts are about. And that's one of the things that we're really interested in doing at this summit. It is generally the view in our society today that you are a business person, or you're a doctor, or you're an artist, but you can't have skills that intertwine. And the truth is, hundreds of years ago, it was thought that you could be an artist but also have impact on society in other ways. You could be a doctor, and you could also have impact on society in other ways. But because we become so compartmentalized in our society, we tend to think of you only as an artist, and if you have artistic skills, you can't help society in other ways. The truth is, artists have made some of the most significant contributions to our society outside of the arts, and what we want to do in this summit is talk about ways that those of you who have artistic skills and artistic capabilities and artistic knowledge can help create solutions for some of the other very serious problems our country has. And so to the extent that we can do so in this one-day summit, what we hope to do is to inspire everybody here to think about ways they can make the society better outside of just your artistic skills. You may have skills that are terrific in certain artistic ways, but you might be able to apply those skills to other problems our society has. And to the extent that we can get policymakers in Washington to recognize that some of the greatest talent in our country is not necessarily in Congress, but it may be in the artistic sector of our society. And that's one of the things we want to accomplish today. And I just want to thank all of you for coming to help participate in this. And I'd like to thank Mario for putting this together and organizing this, the terrific assemblage of people. I will not do any rap singing during this summit, but if any of you want to watch it, it's on the internet somewhere. You can see it. It'll be the least impressive rap song you've ever seen. One of the people who has been most responsible for helping to put this together, in addition to Mario, has been Deborah Rutter. Deborah is somebody who joined the Kennedy Center as the president of the Kennedy Center about 3 years ago, and we are very fortunate she signed up for another 5 years. She was previously the, you can applaud, yes. She was for 10 years the head of the Chicago Symphony, and prior to that, 10 years the head of the Seattle Symphony. She has a background in the arts. She was a musician as a younger person, and now she's regaining that skill as she's taking piano lessons, but she's not going to perform today. Is that right? No. But Deborah Rutter has done a terrific job in re-energizing the Kennedy Center in many ways and making certain that events like the Art Summit is one that everybody who participates in will feel is well worth their time. As I said the other day to some of you, the most valuable commodity all of us have is really not money, not that resource that we often need to make these kinds of places work. It's your time, because time is something you can never regain. And when you give us your time, you're giving us your most precious resource. So I want to thank all of you for giving us your time today, and hopefully in the future as well. And by doing that, I think you're going to help make the Kennedy Center a better place, make it possible for us to live up to the ideals of President Kennedy. And one of the people who are most responsible for helping us to live up to those ideals is Deborah Rutter. Deborah?
You're amazing. Thank you. Good morning and welcome. Where would you like me to stand? Welcome. As you can tell from just listening to him, and to be in this space and to have the opportunity to hear Ekene's work, I am one of the most fortunate people in the world because I get to be involved with all of this. This is our 5th annual summit. Thank you, David, for dreaming it up. All good ideas lead back to him, by the way, as you can tell. This summit is a really important day. In some ways, we think, well, gosh, it's just another day in the life of the Kennedy Center. But it's a really important day for us to pause and have a conversation about different ideas and the role of the arts in our society. So I'm really grateful for all of you for being here, for being active participants in this conversation. Our citizen artists, who this is our 3rd year, we will introduce a 3rd round of citizen artists, have had an enormous impact. And if you reflect on that work that we just had, the conversation that Ekene has brought to our institution, that he has had with his colleagues this past year, and that he will continue to have into the future, has had a huge impact on how we think about the role of the arts in our world. And today is about us making further and deeper connections with all of you. So those of you who don't put artist first in your name, but artist somewhere in your description, self-description, we're particularly excited to make the connections with you today. You and this conversation help us think about the role of the Kennedy Center as the National Cultural Center in our role in society. What and how can we provide the platform for all voices to be heard? How can we bring all voices and all of the performing arts to the Kennedy Center in the deepest and most respectful way? To that end, one of the individuals who we've been in conversation for the last year and who will be announced today as a 2018 citizen artist has helped us think about the role of understanding the native lands on which we reside and where we find ourselves today. And I would just like to think about this as a concept for all of us, to understand the land on which we stand today, where we are today, but also where you are when you go back home, and to understand the Native Americans who were on that land in the first place. And I think it's a conversation that we're just beginning to have here. But Rulan, thank you for helping us. I'm still learning about what this really can mean. But there's something to understand, and our friends and colleagues to the north in Canada are doing a really beautiful job with this, something for us as Americans to think about. So if I can just take a moment and ask us to reflect on the fact that we stand on the land here of the Piscataway and the Powhatan. And it was their land that we are now, it is their land, it was their land, and it is our land collectively now. And for us to recognize that and respect it, to understand the beauty and the power of the Native people who lived here before we are here. So today is going to be a day of great conversation, meeting lots of new people, understanding the world in perhaps a new perspective in a new way. I want to say thank you to Damian Wetzel, who has been my partner and my friend for a long time, but this is our fourth together, Damian Wetzel. He still has the title of Aspen Institute Arts Director, but he's about to be, if he isn't kind of already, the new president of Juilliard School. So we are very lucky. Thank you, Damian, for your help in organizing today. My other great friend, Eric Liu, who, when I first met him, I thought, how could anybody be that smart? He is so extraordinary. He has the ability to synthesize ideas and present them in a way that I never could. I'm still in awe and learning from him, even though we've been around each other for a number of years. And his organization that he created, Citizen University, is one of the most interesting organizations trying to help us understand who we are as individuals and what we can do to positively impact the world around us. You will hear from both of them throughout the day. So thank you both for being with us for a number of years and helping organize. Mario Rosero, David Kilpatrick, Vanessa Thomas, who are the dream team who have put all of the logistics together for today. Thank you very much. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to our friends Rachel Fine and Mark Slavkin from the Wallace Performing Arts Center in California, and their partnership and their inspiration and the probing conversations that we've had together. And David, for your constant support and belief and inspiration in what we do, and the Wallace Annenberg Foundation for their support of this. I wish you a great day. I look forward to being with you throughout the day and for us to have collective learning throughout the day and then to celebrate at the end of it. So welcome, thank you very much for being here, and I'd like to turn it over now to Mario.
Thank you, Deborah. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so thrilled to see you. The Art Summit is sort of becoming a holiday annually for us because we are so excited for these conversations. I'm Mario Rosero. I have the great honor and privilege of being the Senior Vice President of Education here at the center, and we're one of the three arms, the three pillars that really make up the institution, and we really see our education work as being the national reach of the center because we have partnerships and networks in every single state. So we are thrilled to welcome folks from across the nation and world here today. I will be serving as your MC throughout the day, and today's theme, as you probably noticed from your program book and from the screen, is the future states of America, using the arts to take us where we need to go. This language, these words came from Congressman Lewis at an event we held here last year, and it really inspired us throughout the year in our planning to think about how the arts can really make a difference if we look at today's current issues and challenges we're facing, but take a future-looking approach. What if we look 10, 15, 20 years out and imagine a future where these problems have been solved because there's been a healthy dose of the arts added to challenges in education, health and wellness, and finite resources. I'd like to take a minute to look at the program so you can follow along in your printed materials or on the screen or in the app. In this morning's inspiration section, we'll be experimenting with a new format called the Long Conversation, where we will hear from experts across our three landscapes that I mentioned, education, health, wellness, finite resources, but also adding that artistic perspective as well. Please note in the program, Dr. John Foley wasn't able to make it today, so we send him well wishes to be on a good road to recovery, but we are thrilled that Susan Pell, Science and Public Programs Manager from the U.S. Botanic Garden, will be joining us. So we appreciate you, Susan, for jumping in. As we look to the afternoon, after lunch, there will be one of three breakout sessions available, one in each of the landscapes, and we will carry the conversations from this morning into those afternoon breakouts, also with performance involved. And at the end of the day, we reconvene in our atrium space to really process the day, spend some time percolating on the thoughts, the ideas, the connections you've made. I do want to note that there are some signature opportunities to actually engage in some art making. So at lunchtime, you'll have an opportunity to connect with one another in some smaller groups. And we want to thank our citizen artist from 17D Nichols for creating a food spark that happens at lunchtime, as well as recognize citizen artist Michelle Angela Ortiz. You may have seen the Libertad installation when you came in and registered. That's an inspiration piece that we just installed, especially for this event, but there's also another hands-on interactive art making piece that is inspired from that. Both of those are available at lunch, and then Michelle's piece will also be available for hands-on interaction during the reception after today. So these curated performances that are really part of today really uplift and honor the artist. And I do have to say, Akene, thank you so much for being both vulnerable and brave in sharing your work. We appreciate you and we uplift your work. And we absolutely encourage everyone to be active on social. The hashtags are on the back of your program book if you need a reminder, but hashtag Kennedy Center, hashtag Citizen Artist, and hashtag Arts Summit. So at this time, it is my great pleasure and honor to bring up a good friend to the Kennedy Center and a thought partner and planner for these summits over the past few years. Please welcome from Citizen University, Mr. Eric Liu. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you all so much for being here. I just want to speak briefly to the arc of the day. You'll be hearing at the end of the afternoon more from Deborah and from me as we try to make sense of what we will be learning and building together. And I just wanted to plant a seed as we go forth into these conversations and the interactive sessions throughout the day. There are two seeds. One is this phrase that we've been hearing already a fair amount this morning, and that is citizen artist. And I think it's worth our taking a moment right now just to be intentional about what we mean by that phrase. As David said in his remarks here, the way in which we become compartmentalized in our identities is a menace not only to the work of the Kennedy Center, but to the health of our republic right now. And I think this is a time where we have to be thinking about that concept of citizen artist in both directions. Certainly as you all come to meet both the current and the outgoing crop of citizen artist fellows, understanding artists as citizens, artists who are aware of their place and responsibility, the land in which they stand, the silences and the noises and the voices which they are called to represent. But I think it's just as important for all of us in the room here to be thinking about the other direction as well, and that is the citizen as artist. And to be thinking about the ways in which we, in our lives as citizens, just as participants in democratic life, are trying to bring to bear the same courage, the same imagination, the same sense of empathy and compassion that Akene, that all the other citizen artist fellows embody today, and that arts in general are meant to cultivate. And so for you, in your lives as participants in civic life, to be thinking about how can you bring to bear the fullest breadth of your creativity and imagination. That's the seed that we want to plant today. And as we go out through this day, whether it's with me or Mario or Deborah or other members of the amazing Kennedy Center team here, we ask you to share with us actually how you're being moved, how your sense of the possible, your frame of what is possible in political and civic and social life is shifting as a result of the conversations and the interactions that you're engaging today. We'll be kind of collecting and harvesting those kinds of ideas that come from all of you during the day and presenting them back to you at the conclusion of the afternoon. So we just wanted to plant that seed and let it sprout over the course of the day. Thank you so much, and so excited for this summit.
Thank you, Eric. We absolutely encourage you to use your program books in the notes section because you don't want to miss a good question or idea that might come up. So it's not just your guide for the day, but it's also a tool. Before we begin, I'd additionally like to thank 3 new thought partners that joined us in the planning of this summit. Mr. Chung Lee out of Chicago and 180 Design has really helped us think about the construction interaction at the very end of the day. Mr. Sam Seidel from the D School at Stanford, also really thoughtful in helping us think through the flow and the interactions all over. And then also Peace First, we'll have a youth representative from them join our morning conversation. So quick round of applause for our 3 new thought partners. And I always like to do this up front so we don't forget at the end of the day. If my team that is in the room could stand real quickly, we just want to acknowledge and thank them for all their contributions. You have my deep gratitude, and the hundreds of folks that are not in the room today but also helped to make this happen. We really appreciate everyone's contributions. So I'd now like to introduce artists J. Period, Mai Muna Yusuf, and Maida Del Valle for a performance. Thank you.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it.
Children of the New World, descendants of the conqueror and conquered, offspring of Africa and Turtle Island, children of the crossing, of global waters of wind and red clay dirt, progeny of the peculiar institution of trade routes and commerce, we the collateral damage of empire. Children of Anacaona and Nzinga, seeds hidden in mother's braids, planted in new soil, roots buried deep, blended names, blended tongues, blended gods, summoned forth by the idea in the mind of an ancient. Cradled under ribcage and flesh for 280 days, listening to the electric fluttering of our mother's heart, listening to its incessant drum. That's why our rhythm is the weapon, and our medicine's a song, so we listen, and we love, and we dance on the one. Children of the diaspora, forged from miracle and sound, the B-side of a miracle, a syncopated song. Heirs of criminalized culture are we, heirs of the outlaw drum are we, conceal freedom in the djembe and juba, bambula, boogaloo, bachata, soca, and salsa is us, breakbeat, disco, house, and hip-hop is us, rumba, palo, merengue, makulele, but music to dance to, music to worship, music to call down, spirit is us, music for the spirit is us, music to live by, music we cry to, music we die to, music to love by, music to love by. Music to love by, that's why our rhythm is the weapon, and our medicine's a song, cause we listen, and we love, and we dance on the one, that's why our rhythm is the weapon, and our medicine's a song, cause we listen, and we love, and we dance on the one.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Let's hear it again for J. Period, Maimuna, and Maida. And a surprise performance by President Kennedy in there too, which was pretty amazing to include his words and voice. Thank you, Carrie. It is now time to introduce another friend. In fact, I'll call this person family because every time I get on the phone with him, his greeting is, hello, family. So we're going to consider this next gentleman a Kennedy Center cousin. Mr. Mark Bamuti Joseph is, I'm just going to do the brief list, but you can find out more in your program book, but a 2017 TED Global Fellow, an inaugural recipient of the Guggenheim Social Practice Initiative, and an honoree of the United States Artist Rockefeller Fellowship. He currently and proudly serves as Chief of Program and Pedagogy at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Please welcome Mark.
Oh, thanks. That's cool. I want to be a Kennedy Center cousin. That's hot. I'm bringing the potato salad, though, to the cookout. You know. I was born in New York and sharpened in Atlanta. I now work in San Francisco, home of the Church of St. John Coltrane the Divine. At 15, a love supreme is watching black people commit to each other in love and parenthood on Spike Lee's cinema screen. At 19, a love supreme is debates about melanin's capacity to bind space-time, a pre-vibranium and drug-addled compendium of cosmos and low-end theories. At 28, a love supreme is my toddler, drawing rocket ships in the Maui sand, races between a boy and an ocean to etch permanence on a shoreline. At 42, I am older than Coltrane was when he created Love Supreme, and really curious how the fuck you make something so timeless before your time runs out. To begin today, let's try to remember that at our best, we are love. If you look real close, you can see he has 21, maybe 27 hairs on his chin. At first you miss the hair because the first thing you notice is his skin. If it were soil, his is the earth brown you'd want to sow in. A Chicago sun. Hard times, he does not blink. So think of this brother brown, and now see this mother black. You see how dark the day becomes when you bury the sun. How you set the future back. A mother inters a murdered teen. We're going to talk really big ideas today, so I want to begin by trying to make this really small, maybe about the size of the human heart. As we engage one another today, let's not ever, ever forget the personal stakes of the moment. Here are mine. My 16-year-old son recently earned his learner's permit at the DMV. The occasion came with a dad-imposed set of qualifiers. We had to agree about the difference between license, which the state gives him, permission, which I am reluctant to give him, and right, which may be granted by the cosmos, but is still toothless unless I hand over the keys to my car. At my house, these are the days of black kid rights, a more fully exposed position in the system's predatory sights. As I sit in the passenger seat while he gets on the freeway, my life is in his hands. That said, driving with my son is just as much about physical mechanics as social ones. In talking him through the cues the road presents, I point out the police car 2 lanes over. His hands are on the wheel at 2 and 10, like a boy in Missouri with his hands halfway up to surrender. Our communication is explicitly laced with the vocabulary of the new Jim Crow and is intuitively silent, like the posture of someone who's been wronged for generations. we're not just driving the freeway, we're moving into a new semi-permanent status in his life, the profile of potential suspect. For all our country's brave talk about democracy and freedom, this public act of driving while black is the highest stakes lesson he might ever receive in American civics. We are here today to begin naming what's on the other side of the politically impossible, to articulate a pathway through art that doesn't magically land us in a utopia of equity and inclusion, but brings us a step closer. If freedom for all is the goal and we can't get there by 5 o'clock today, what's the plane in proximity to that? We're here not to arrive at the impossible utopia, but to strategically, lovingly, and creatively begin to describe an adjacent possible. What is within our reach and also necessary to achieve before we get there? For instance, we couldn't go from methane to the wheel right after the Big Bang. We couldn't go from first utterance to Octavia Butler, or from the Garden of Eden to Beyonce, although. Yeah, I'm still recovering. I don't know about y'all, but the hair, the whole thing. She is as both evolved and as primordial as it gets. In between these giant leaps are smaller evolutionary steps. And part of the challenge here today is to apply art and design thinking to social evolution, to literally ask ourselves, as I do at my home institution, Yerba Buena in San Francisco, is it possible to pedagogically choreograph social justice? We are focused here today on 3 elements of a collective freedom design: education, equitable access to financial and built resources and capital, and more efficient and holistic health systems for all Americans. To these, artist that I am, I suggest an elemental tie that binds them all. I want to show you an excerpt from an opera called We Shall Not Be Moved. I wrote the libretto. It was composed by Daniel Bernard Romaine, and it was directed and choreographed by Bill T. Jones.
Oh, gee, say, love yourself, baby. Oh, gee, say, self-love leads to sex love.
Oh, gee, say, time did not reconcile me to my chains. It made me familiar with them.
Say black and hear yes. Say black and hear enough. Say love is the only word sweeter than black. 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 Love is the only word sweeter than
Thank you. The countertenor, John Holiday from Houston, Texas. Among the artists, what do you hear that keeps showing up in our freedom design? A love supreme. Love over rules. See me, self-styled and shaped in black identity. Love is the only word sweeter than black. On the road, my kid learns to signal before switching, just as he learns the frightening numbers that mark him unwittingly as a target. We talk about license and permission and rights. Freedom, however, is different than mobility. Driving is a gift and a convenience, but freedom is a destination of birthright. And in my family, the vessel most likely to get us there is artistic practice. Through art, we ask lawmakers who steward our social context to reach a little higher than the plane of a prison keyhole when considering justice for all. We ask, where is our public imagination? Who would we be if we spent even 1% of the Pentagon's budget on a department of inspiration? How might we envision Kennedy's moonshot speech if his aim was not space, but education, or public health, or equity? If Kennedy's moon was actually abolition, what would be the role of art in getting us there? It is personal, family. It can never not be personal. I am at an intersection where parenthood, structural racism, juvenile justice, and creative practice all meet. Our challenge is to normalize pathways for young people to understand that the world is not a utopia, but theirs is the right to justice and to joy. We can't undo history, but we can co-create conditions for young people to inscribe creative freedom and movement in their expectations for the future. That is our charge. Thank you. So, we have the great kind of honor and privilege of initiating this long conversation. You'll see the form in practice fairly quickly. This is my very good friend, Linda Nathan.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for inviting me to be with you.
No doubt.
I guess I want to start by asking us, when I was listening to you, I was thinking about, I go way back to public schools, public education. Oh, sorry. I could hear him so well. Okay. In the 70s, and I remember directing a West Side Story with 11 and 12-year-olds, but I incorporated community police in the show because we were having such difficulties in Boston with gang violence. And I was thinking, listening to you, what would it look like today if the police officers were here with us, were thinking artistically with us, and were making art with us? I'd love to hear you think about that. I have a lot of, I've been teaching a lot of years, so I have a lot of students, a lot of graduates who are actually in the police force, who are artists as well as police officers.
Yeah.
I know that's hard to think about.
Well, our issue isn't politicians. Our issue is a system that rewards expediency over progress. And our issue isn't police officers. It is the legacy of a country designed to plunder Black people in particular, and marginalized people in general. Yeah. I'm so proud that we acknowledge the initial stewards of this particular land, and when we do that, we also have to acknowledge the theft and plunder, both of the land and of the people.
I'm just thinking of small changes. I'm trying to think of what would it look like here today. I'm thinking about the recommendation I just wrote for an amazing saxophonist who wants to be a police officer.
Yeah.
And I want to embody that here.
Well, I think that we start big.
Yeah.
Because when you bring up police officers,
I know,
that's
it
a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
But then I think one of the small changes, and maybe it feels big, but maybe to me it's small, one of the small changes is just the acknowledgement of our history
Yeah.
and our histories, and having that be a significant part of our discourse. Not in a way that necessarily minimizes our current contributions, but in a way that's just encourages honest conversation. I think that that's what art does.
Yeah.
You know, art is as much of an emotional practice as it is a tactical one. And, you know, when I talk about making our discussion today personal, it is about a kind of intimacy and a kind of acknowledgement that I then think leads to empathy. And I think empathy is what's missing in our strategic design in and around urban and rural centers.
Yeah. So, you know, for all these years I've worked in public education, I can say with certainty that if you are a student in an urban high school,
Yeah.
I can guarantee you won't get art.
Mm.
You'll get double English, double math, and if you're an ELL kid, an English language learner kid, you definitely won't get art. And I can also say with certainty, having been someone who's promoted and worked with kids in the arts forever, that if we do give kids artistic experience on a daily basis, their view of the future, their view of themselves will be enormously expanded. So when I think of what we here today can think about and demand, we can demand as teachers, I consider myself a teacher, as administrators, I consider myself an administrator, as principals, I consider myself still a principal, that daily art making is something that happens not as an after-school activity, but as an in-school activity. And I want that to be, if we're thinking about big steps, little steps, I want to know that in every school in this country, kids are daily art making. That would change the world.
How have you seen that work in your particular practice?
I've been very fortunate that since I began in the 70s as a teacher in the Boston Public Schools, I've been either the art teacher myself or the principal creating the art. But I think that as high-stakes testing has taken over in this country, and as we think that the only way to measure progress is through a multiple-choice test, the arts get pushed to the side again and again. But I think we have to speak out about that. I think, you know, if this is the Kennedy Center and we're thinking about the role, I do think about the role of politics. It's a political reason that we don't have the arts. It's a political reason that we think the only way to measure intelligence is by what you do on a math test. That's not okay.
No, it's not.
That makes me furious. That's
Well, so we were talking about that too, just kind of incidentally. You know, we've talked about love today, and you just talked about your furiousness. What is the role of rage? Because I think so many of us have this kind of amorphous, can't name it, but it's just kind of this elemental.
Well, rage has to get us to be activists, right? And we can't be afraid, particularly those of us as public school educators. It's so, you know, there's a demonstration every year here. There's an Occupy here in Washington. There's an Occupy the Department of Ed. Teachers come disfrazados, they come in masks because they're afraid of being identified by their districts. They're afraid of speaking out against high-stakes testing because we've got a narrative now that good is what you get on a test score. And we have to change that narrative, and I'm afraid that the only way we'll change it is by being angry, but you got to organize. So I believe deeply that we have to organize in our communities, that it's critical that kids are reading and writing at high levels, particularly kids growing up in urban environments, but it's also critical that kids are making art. And until that becomes an equal demand with reading and writing, we will be poorer for it. And I don't believe without the arts, we'll be able to express love to our fullest.
How do you think that this kind of arts-inscribed pedagogy or this art making, how do we connect that to maybe a more equitable distribution of resources? Kind of draw the arc for me.
Okay, let me see if I can. And you know, I wish we could open this up because I'm sure there's a zillion ideas here of people who might want to think about how to do that. I think this notion of, when I was trained as an elementary teacher, so I know I'm dating myself, but I was actually required to learn to play the drums, the piano, and guitar. I actually think, I know, it's like, what? And I was also trained in Wisconsin. I also was trained to understand the native people of Wisconsin. I couldn't be certified as a teacher without those 4 elements. This is in the 70s. I want to bring that back. We did do some good things back then. There should not be teachers anymore in this country that are not bilingual and that don't have, thank you, that don't have a strong sense of themselves as people who can make art. And I don't care if it's music, dance, movement, visual arts, writing, I don't care what it is, but we should not be certifying teachers that can't make art in their classrooms.
That's a beautiful thing. That bell signals my transition out. I just want to invoke my wife, who's a first grade teacher.
Yeah.
And something that she does, I mean, first of all, she's fine as hell. She's a black woman teacher. I mean, just a black woman as a first grade teacher.
That's all right.
But one of the things that she does is she has dance parties in her room.
All right.
So, her first graders are growing up with Earth, Wind, and Fire. They're growing up with, Michael Jackson. I came in the room the other day, and she put on "It Takes Two" by Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock. I mean, I caught a cramp because I was in there too. But we often think of first graders as these kind of like wiggly, and they are, and she channels that rhythmically, musically, and the first question that you asked me was about police, and Saul Williams says beliefs are the police of the mind, which is to say that beliefs, as opposed to beliefs narrow our thinking. And one of the things that I love about my wife's classroom practice is that she's not policing the body, she's liberating it. And that's maybe something.
And we'll get her on YouTube, and I'm sure she's got nothing to do with all this no grit slant stuff that's going on right now. So this sit up, look, ask questions, nod, track. I want to get her on YouTube and celebrate her first grade work.
I want to celebrate her too. There's my time.
First grade teachers.
Peace, first grade teachers. All right.
Hey, you. Nice to see you again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hank, and I am a person.
Yeah, he's an amazing person. I got to have dinner with him last night. He's also got an amazing family, so you are an amazing person. So maybe we start by talking about small changes, big changes that you want to make.
I had a question actually for you about what was the smallest thing that made a change in your life
As
to
a kid,
affect what you do today?
Yeah, seeing live performance. And I want that for all young people. So I remember, and I still do it to this day, I'll still go, whatever theater I'm in, I have to wait and for the actors to leave so I can say congratulations. Because I remember seeing a show, I don't even know if, I think it was Man of La Mancha. I think that's what it was, and I still love that show today.
And what did it do to you? What happened?
Yeah. I loved what they were doing on stage. I loved Dulcinea. I loved the fact that Don Quixote could, fight the windmills. And so part of what I've always believed in is we got to take young people to see lots and lots of performances.
And so from there, I'm just,
right.
from there, because I asked you a lot of questions yesterday, but from there, how did it lead you to become
a teacher and yeah.
Yeah, because you said at 18 years you wanted to.
Well, I knew at 6 I wanted to be a teacher, so I'm one of the, I think I knew really early on that that was the way to change the world, was through, the way Mark was talking about his teacher, his wife. I wanted to be a first grade teacher and do just that. So I've gone up to high school, and now I'm back with little people again, which is wonderful.
And making art yourself.
I do. You're going to make me talk about that. Yeah, I'm a production potter, not by, it's a hobby, but I can make a mug a minute and a bowl every 2 minutes.
And so it's,
I was trained to do it fast.
but that seems to tie into your molding minds and molding clay. And,
yeah, I love working with clay.
But also, I guess, is it also a process of allowing the material to be what it is?
I love fighting, and so you fight with clay to get it centered, and it requires a lot of physical energy, and I like that physical energy, and I like the complete focus. I can't even listen to music when I'm throwing pots. I gotta have it be, I want it to be just there. It's so intense for me.
Wow.
I love that process. All right, come on, I get to ask you some questions. Can you talk about your art making and?
Yeah, I mean, well, I say I'm a person, and usually people laugh, which I kind of think is funny, but unfortunately, my humanity is often actually seen as something funny or not worth remembering. So I don't think it's critical to define myself as anything other than a person, and what I do as an artist is really just my life. I think one of the challenges with the way, although I love the theater, I love the gallery, museum, and exhibition space. I think one of the challenges with art, especially in Western society, as we've been trained and it's become kind of ubiquitous, is that it's something that's over there that we're supposed to pay attention to, not that we're supposed to live and participate in throughout our lives in continuity. And I think I am by nature a watcher, but also I am also a fidgeter, and so and also I guess the school system today would have called me ADD, and possibly dyslexic.
I love teaching students like you.
But I definitely was one of those students that could never get right, and I wound up actually at the first. I actually went to Duke Ellington School for the Arts in Georgetown.
Yeah.
And I was in the Museum Studies program, and being in a public school, mostly African American, and actually being in a program that's designed to teach you critical thinking, was really profound, because I didn't learn how to paint or draw, I didn't learn how to play an instrument, but I learned that my capacity to look and to draw connection could actually be a really powerful way of communicating with others. So that's what I do today. So I do it through painting, sculpture, photography, video, art, and more recently I've started an initiative as a large collaboration called For Freedoms, which initially started as a super PAC with the goal of trying to put critical discourse into political discourse, because our society and civic leaders need to be creative thinkers.
Right.
So that's my current art project.
I love it. And one of the things I was thinking about as we were listening to the speakers this morning and Mark's work is this notion of art as evolutionary or revolutionary. And evolutionary art maybe are the small changes that get into our DNA that let us think differently or act differently. But revolutionary art may disrupt and may allow us to take a different path. And it seems like your art really bridges both of those worlds. I wondered if you agreed, disagreed, or whether those are words that don't work for you either.
Well, first of all, I just gotta, Mark is just so amazing.
He is. His work is great.
His capacity to go from kind of extemporaneous to the kind of revelational is something that I am in awe of. And
me too.
So I felt weird coming up right after him.
How do you think I feel in between you two guys? I'm like, oh my God.
But I think I want to answer the question correctly. So can you ask it one more time?
No, there's not a correct answer. I think about,
Thoughtfully.
In my experiences working with young people, so I think a lot about when are we doing evolutionary kind of work and when are we doing revolutionary kind of work. And, as teachers, we're always like, oh, you can't do the revolutionary kind of thing. You're not supposed to do the disruptive thing. But I think we are. And I just think your work, it's incredible, your work. And so I just wondered if you were thinking about the bridge you build, helping us both to evolve, but to be revolutionary in the way we approach your work.
Well, I don't know.
Because your work's very disruptive in a good way.
there are many tiny revolutions.
Yeah.
I think the greatest revolution, the smallest revolution that can happen within our hearts is loving when you want to hate.
Nice.
There are often
Nice.
times when that has to do with myself.
Yeah.
You know, I can't do something, I'm angry at myself,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I'm angry at my wife or my
Yeah.
mother or
Yeah.
my someone who works with me, but where I want to like actually throw salt in something just because of my own discomfort, and finding a way to turn that into something, if not, hopefully sweet or warm. And I think that is I think in teaching that's the same, and that's also how I was raised. You know, I most of the way that I was disciplined as a child was like through this kind of warm lovingness, which didn't allow me to like learn how to do certain things well, but it kept me very aware of like staying close to love. And I think so. My cousin who was murdered, he said love overrules, which Mark recently, and those are the last words I heard him say, were recorded. And this idea of love overrules, you know, there was a quote I cannot remember right now, but there is something about love being a central educational tool, like that. Even if you don't know how to do this or do that, finding a love within yourself will allow you to find access to new spaces and opportunities. And having passed on your love of teaching to your children, I'm curious about kind of how that feels.
Yeah. Well, I'm really, really proud. I got, 2 out of my 3 children are educators, and one is, I was telling Mark this morning, one's teaching public school in Oakland, and that makes me really, really proud that he's carrying on the tradition of being a public school teacher. He's in an arts pathway and helping kids be musicians and visual artists, and I don't know what my daughter's going to end up doing, but it'll be something with education. So to me, teaching is probably the best profession we can have, and I want us all to think of ourselves as teachers and artists, and you certainly are that, and boy, it's been an honor to share the conversation with you, but I heard the bell, so I think I'm exiting, and
thank you for
thanks
all the
so
work
much.
you've done.
Thanks so
and
much
continue
for
to
what you do.
So we were sitting next to each other, so let's start with the hugging.
Can we also start by acknowledging that you're joining me in a dream I'm having, that I'm talking to Hank Willis Thomas at the Kennedy Center right now?
Well, maybe you are dreaming.
All right.
So since we're dreaming, what kind of, how far are we going to take this? Where is your imagination going to take you?
Well, so the future state that I'm thinking about has to do with access to capital for artists. So regardless of where you live, whether you live in rural spaces or urban spaces, regardless of your background, you have access to capital to fund your ideas and to fund your work. I think that's the future state. And I'm Angelique Power. I'm the president of the Field Foundation based in Chicago. Thank you. I've been there for 20 months now, and we're in the process of rethinking philanthropy. So that finite resources part, that's been a part of the dream, the reflection. How do we actually function differently in this moment?
And I can't help but also to think about, the proverb, give a person a fish and they can eat for a day, teach them how to fish, they'll eat forever. And having been an artist who has been benefited from actually a lot of grant and funding support throughout my career, I do also think about, like, what would have happened if I'd been taught how to fish? Because that's something that I think artists are often seen to like run away from, and often in a certain way sometimes infantilize. Like, don't think about how the money will just support you, and otherwise just eat rice. So there's like and that's also how we approach it. Is like, if someone gives me money to make art, I will make art and everything else in my life will suffer. And I wonder if there's ways that we can learn within the educating of artists how to also allow them, or encourage them to think long term about how they utilize and maximize their support.
I actually think that artists hustle and try to get access to capital so much better than most. I think the issue is with the systems in place to provide the capital. And so, for example, in philanthropy, when I started, one of the things that we did was we asked the nonprofit community to review us. Normally, philanthropy holds nonprofits accountable. So when I started, we sent out a survey to artists, to nonprofits, to folks who were funded, folks that weren't funded, and said, what have we been doing right, and what could we do better? And we learned a lot. We also asked them to kick the tires on philanthropy with us. At the same time, we studied the city of Chicago, and we looked at it to figure out. I started in July of 2016, and the Laquan McDonald video.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, right. The Laquan McDonald video had been out for about 7 months, which, if you don't know, that was a 16-year-old African-American young man who was shot 16 times. 15 of those shots were when he was lying down. We were halfway through what would later be the second bloodiest chapter in Chicago's history, and our state budget had been frozen for a year. It would continue on to be frozen for almost another year, so nonprofits were emaciated. At the same time, I was coming from the Joyce Foundation, where I was having a lot of fun and working with a lot of artists, but I was also becoming a skeptic of philanthropy and really wondering how missionary philanthropy seems to be, as opposed to actually serving nonprofits. So one of the first things we did was take our board and staff at the Field Foundation through racial justice training. And your analogy of, give a person a fish, we talk about that a lot in terms of the parable of the babies in the river, which I don't know if anybody knows that parable.
Oh, tell us.
So a person is walking along a river, and all of a sudden a baby comes floating down. And alarmed, the person jumps in to save the baby, just as another baby comes floating, and then another and another. And eventually the person has to set up spaces to house and clothe and educate and nourish the babies, and all the while, babies are just streaming down the river. There's never a time to look up and say, where the hell are the babies coming from? What's going on? And so it was important for our board and staff to hear this parable, because it's the difference between charity and social change. And while there's a lot of important work happening on the banks of the river, if we really want to be in service to the issues that are happening, we have to understand root causes, systemic interventions, and we need to move upstream.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much in there to think about. And being one of those babies, or having been one of those babies, and maybe now, hopefully trying to find the agency to hold on to the shore and maybe grab the hands of others. I think both on the shore and in the water, because the river's rising. And I think I feel that our society loses a lot by everyone not considering themselves to be a creator and to be an artist, because when you call something art, it allows you to think creatively about the stuff you already know. It allows you to break those rules, and I think that's critical. I think it's important to recognize that without art, there's no culture, and without culture, there's no humanity, and without humanity, there's no society. And I think it's the fact that we feel the need to support artists in the arts is actually part of the problem, because we don't necessarily see that as something that we are living in, living with. But also, I do think as a person, as I said, I don't want to have to go to a foundation that was probably based off of, it's an apologist for like, industrial exploitation of certain people in order for me to like be able to do something I think is good. I mean, we're all a part of the problem, but I also feel like it'd be wonderful to know a little bit more of how to do some stuff and not to be in that situation of like, oh, I spent, for 4 years working on a project that I got a grant of $50,000 for. Right. So then I wound up probably spending $250,000, and what if I could have used my same time to figure out how to make that money to continue to support itself. Mm-hmm. And so I'm somewhat ambivalent and desperate for foundation money.
I brought cash today,
but because for Freedoms, we're trying to do this 50-state initiative where we want to do exhibitions, town halls, and billboards in all 50 states ahead of the midterm elections in an anti-partisan way. But the idea is that arts organizations, educational institutions are already doing important and critical civic work, and I think part of what Eric spoke about is that this need for all hands on deck. And that when you call something political, people realize that there's something at stake. And when you call something art, they're open. It encourages them to open their minds. And so I hope that more institutions that support are doing things like what you're doing and asking critical questions. But I also hope that you find ways to support those you support to think beyond,
So I think the bell is a 2-minute warning, so I'm going to let us go for a second more, because what you're saying is really important and what I think about a lot. You and I were talking outside about heat maps, the study that we did that we have on our website, where we studied where race and need align in the city of Chicago. One of the things for the art heat map was that 13% of arts organizations were located on the south and west side of Chicago. And often we talk about those spaces as cultural deserts, right? But when we pulled where copyrights for music licenses were sold, the majority of them were sold on the south and west side of Chicago. So these aren't cultural deserts. It just doesn't look like 501c3 organizations that foundations normally support. So there are artists, there are collectives, there are businesses that are doing this work that need capital. They don't need a 20-page grant application. They don't need unrealistic expectations of how they spent that money and how they prove that they've spent it right. So those are things that we're asking ourselves. We're talking to the IRS. How can we fund differently? How can we fund individuals? And beyond the Field Foundation, I really think that that's the opportunity, that individual donors, collectors, that each of us, that we fund artists to lead us into new spaces.
And also, I've been spending more time with certain musical artists, and a lot of the kind of more successful, like hip-hop artists, are recognizing that, although they may have sold a lot of records, they didn't necessarily own, because they sold the copyrights to their music, and so they're recognizing how much of their own cultural capital they gave away at a really kind of discounted price.
I think when they get to 3, it's like, you done.
Who is? Thank you. Thank you very much.
You made it.
I made it.
I'm so excited.
I know. I was excited too. My driver, he was on it, y'all. Like, he was like, you got to be there at 10:10. I'm going to get you there at 10:06. I was like, thank you so much.
So tell us about you to start.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Babers. I am 22. I am straight off the plane from Chicago, where I go to school, and I am the editor and founder of Love Girls magazine.
Yay, welcome.
Thank you.
So we've got a little bit of Chicago representing right now.
Definitely.
So what do you think is the greatest opportunity in the frame of this conversation for arts, for citizenry, for Chicago? What do you think is our opportunity?
That's such a good question. First, I want to say that I'm super excited to be talking to you. I did some research, and you're amazing. But I think that the biggest opportunity here is that we have so many amazing minds in the room right now. And so we can collectively think about real solutions to real problems. I'm excited to know what people think about the place that where youth belong in the arts. I'm interested in talking more about the education system and what it's doing to the arts and what it's doing to our youth. I think that conversation could lead to some really, really, really big solutions to a lot of problems that we see today.
So one of the earlier conversations, and I know that one of the things we're trying to do is have many conversations, but also weave some of
Right.
the themes that are happening. So one of the things that was being discussed earlier was youth involvement in arts,
Yeah.
and arts giving agency to youth through
Right.
exposure in the classroom.
Right.
When you think about youth and art and the connection, how it's braided or not, how does it look for you? What's the
Right.
reality and what's the opportunity?
Yeah, so I think about personal experience. And when I started the magazine, I was 15 years old, and I was taking a graphic design class at the time. I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? But I knew that I loved this class. I knew that I was kind of good at it. And so when I was talking to my math teacher, actually, he was like, there's no money in art, right? He was like, you're a smart girl. You could probably find a job somewhere else. He's like, math's not your strong suit. But he's like, there's no money in art. And so when I started the magazine, I wanted to make sure that girls knew that you can do absolutely anything that you want to do, and if you're good at it, you can always make money from it. And so, thanks. And so we started a program implementing graphic design, teaching girls graphic design, as well as other things like finances and event planning and things like that, because it's so important to emphasize that the arts is just as important as your maths and your sciences. And even now, when you think about going into the future and what jobs would look like in a couple of years, there's like your imagination and your creativity, those are going to get you so far, right? And so that's something that we just really, really want to emphasize for our girls, is that art is so important. Yeah.
We're in such an interesting moment, and I'm going off script now, but we're in such an interesting moment of Me Too.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so we're really kind of discussing what it means to be a woman right now, and no longer just abstracting from what that means in terms of binary ideas of gender.
Right.
But we're really allowing ourselves to have more fluidity in understanding gender
100%, yeah.
and understanding it without oppressive structures
Right.
around. So you have a magazine where you are speaking directly
Right.
to girls, young women.
Right.
How do you understand the moment we're in? Because I often find with younger people, they're so much smarter than I am. And they get like intersectionality in a way
Right, yeah.
that I don't have to, I have to sort of moonwalk into intersectionality because that's
Right.
not where like my origins are, but youth sort of understand it. Can you tell us like what this moment means and what some folks are thinking about it?
100%. So that's so funny that you say that, because we just had an issue this past year that was all around the privilege of beauty. And we were trying to teach that concept to our girls because in the age of Me Too, and when you talk about women in the workplace and the stigmas behind gender and intersectionality and all of those things, we want to teach them these terms and what they're up against, but we also want to encourage them to explore themselves, explore their communities, and see how it all kind of like intertwines together. And so at first, when I introduced the concept, like privilege of beauty, girls were like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. They're like, I don't have it, whatever it is, I don't have it. And so walking through those concepts with art with writing, with photography. It really gave them a new way, a new lens to view the privilege of beauty. And so I think that, to your question, sorry, I'm going on a tangent. I think that when we help our girls understand different ways to look at issues, they're smart. And I think that we don't give our youth enough credit, but they do understand. And intersectionality, we did a talk on intersectionality at one of our meetings, and girls got so into it. They were talking about ability and disability. They were talking about race, ethnicity, religion, and so smart.
So with the question of race, Mark, Bamuti, Joseph had a quote that I saw many of us take a picture of about how intertwined America is with racism, that when we protest racism, people think we're protesting America.
Right.
So within intersectionality, within youth, I've seen different kinds of research. And just for all of us, I mean, I have my own questions about how, although we know that the construct, that sort of the racial construct that founded America is false, we forget about it when we move in, when we look at a city budget, or when we look at, other magazines that are out there.
Right.
So do you feel like, I know I spent a lot of my time hosting anti-racism trainings for artists and arts organizations and funders.
Right.
Do you feel like the unpacking of race, structural racism, institutional racism, and individual racism is something that we need to do with everyone, or do you think that youth are coming at it from a different space?
That's so interesting. What does that mean?
2 minutes.
Okay. I think it's always important to put some sort of emphasis on race, because even my generation, although we didn't experience racism like my mom's generation or my grandmother's generation, I also do believe in generational struggles. And so the way, in this day and age with our youth, the way that we consume information and that we witness racism when it happens is so intense, right? When we look at police brutality, for example, and the way that we consume that information, where we can actually see people who look like me getting hurt, getting shot. Although racism is different, it's not gone, right? And so I think that conversation is so important to have. And the way that you have it can be different, right? The way that you might have that conversation with a company, for example, might be different than the way...
Like Starbucks, maybe?
Yeah, like Starbucks, maybe. The way that you have that conversation with Starbucks might be different than the way that you have it with a third grader. But it needs to be talked about, and we need to normalize talking about race and racism. It's when you walk through life as a young chocolate girl, even when you don't feel like there's any sort of racism, because throughout my life, I know that I've been racially profiled, but I know that it hasn't been as bad as my grandma, so there's some sort of gratefulness that I feel. But at the same time, just because it got better doesn't mean that it can't improve more, and we can't get comfortable, with settling. Yeah.
Yeah, or sometimes it's...
Oh, what does that mean?
That means it's done.
Oh, that's it? Oh, wow.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
This
nice
is so
to talk with
fun.
you.
Hi there.
Hello.
I'm not going to speak so much this time.
Okay. Well, congratulations for getting here.
Oh, I thank you.
And for being here at the age of 22. That's
I'm
pretty
so
awesome.
excited. I'm a little nervous,
Give it
but
up.
y'all are so sweet.
I knew you came in late, and I was sitting next to you, and I wish I would have
Yeah.
given you the helpful information that when you hear the bell is when you're supposed to jump up and do your
They did tell me
improvisational
that,
dance.
but it just caught me off guard. And it's the same noise when like your biscuits are ready, you know. So.
Right.
So I also did some research on you, and I'm so interested to know your thoughts on. So the magazine that I do run is it's geared towards girls, young women, and just through some conversations that we have often, there are a lot of young women who don't think that there is a place for them in the sciences, and they do love the art, but again, there's so much stigma about being an artist and you're not going to make any money, and girls are getting more and more into making money and becoming breadwinners and all of those things. And so I'm wondering where you think girls can fit in when it comes to that intersection between art and technology, and where you see that going.
That's a great question. I did some research on you too. And I was thinking about how you're helping to solve that in some ways. And for those who haven't done research on me, I'm Bill O'Brien, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Innovation and the Director of Creative Forces, NEA Military Healing Arts Partnership, or Network for the National Endowment for the Arts. For about 8 years, we've been really looking at the intersections of art science, creativity in the brain, those kinds of things. And for me, this goes back to some of the introductory remarks that you weren't here for, but there are things that operate, I think, at both a highly evolved and this is going back to Mark's comments about Beyonce's performance, highly evolved and primordial at the same time. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're in a really interesting place is we're not quite understanding how we work at an atomic molecular level, both in thinking and emotion, and how we can harness that into something very specific. But I think, you know, the idea of root cause and what our interventions as a response are, I think one of the most interesting issues that come up with whether you're talking about integrating arts and humanities in STEM learning or STEAM, if you want to call it that. Yeah. For me, I think the theme that comes back over and over again that I think you're digging into in these conversations that you're having with the community that you're building is how we can recognize that there's a root problem in these industries, and they know it. They talk about it differently than the art sector does. They don't talk about equity as much as they do about broadening participation. But it's the same thing. And one of the things that we've seen as we're trying to find, you know, really great examples of, you know, maker fairs with Girl Scouts or some of the things we've been funding in our arts education program that really look at these kinds of things. And I remember, Lakita's here, she might remember the name of there was a girl from St. Louis who was through a program like this that was using the arts in an integrated way. And she said it better than I ever could, which is having gone through these kinds of programs, she has a much more sort of heightened, elevated dream of herself. She sees it, and she's like, I can get there someday. And I think there's a lot of pull there as well. You know, I think Silicon Valley has a problem that they know. They just don't quite know how to fix it. But I think the role of the arts in that problem, I think, is to go back to what it does on a rudimentary level, which is help you consider yourself in the context of something bigger than just you. And if you put that in a really defined context, like how could I be an engineer and what could I do with that, is I think one of the most exciting areas about STEAM.
I love that. That's so true. That's so true. So I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I was asked. So in the grand scheme of all of this, what is your biggest hope? What is your ideal situation?
So we had prompts, and one of them, what is your biggest dream? And I thought about that. And I'm going to plagiarize a quote from Eugene O'Neill, who's one of my favorite playwrights. I come from theater before the NEA. And the idea that if we can, this is my twist on it, if we can understand the mysteries that drive our passions for politics,
Right.
religion, race, my beloved Iowa Hawkeyes.
Right.
If we really
You're a
understand
Hawkeyes
how
fan?
that worked on, what's that?
I said you're a Hawkeyes fan?
I'm a Hawkeye fan, yep.
Yikes.
Northwestern's starting to give us some trouble now. But,
They are, aren't they? Getting good.
but if we can really get at that sort of both highly evolved and primordial level, because our emotions drive us in ways that we don't always recognize.
Understand, right.
You know, we're responding to things emotionally.
Right.
And I think ultimately it's about rethinking and re-feeling who our tribes are.
Right.
And that's where we need to get to in our highly evolved way, and we need to
Yeah.
drag our emotions along with it.
I like that, our tribes.
Mhm.
Do you want to speak more on that?
Yeah, that really comes out of the work that I'm doing with the military, bringing creative arts therapy and arts interventions in the clinical level to confront PTS and TBI for military and veteran populations and their families,
Right.
and then bringing it out into community.
Right.
And in the research there, and this connects with so many things that people were saying earlier, at least to me, but the sense of connection and to understand yourself in a larger narrative that's bigger than you
Yeah.
is something I think that is a very healthy thing at the core of service.
Right.
That when people have gone through combat and they're coming back, they're trying to make sense of themselves back in this disconnected 21st century where they
Yeah.
don't have that tight
Right.
connection. And there's a real irony there that sense of service and giving yourself up to
Mhm.
something bigger also is connected to the worst things that we do to
Right.
each other in humanity, and they recognize that as well. So there's real kind of moral and spiritual dilemmas there.
Yeah.
But the sense of tribe, I think, is something Sebastian Junger wrote about. He's a journalist, and he has a book called Tribes.
Mm.
He was embedded for quite a while.
Right.
And he developed PTS before he understood what it was. And he has an anthropological background and talked to other anthropologists. And they connected him to this idea that when you're over there, you're in this tight-knit way that we are wired
Mhm.
to be 40,000 years ago.
Right.
You're with these people, you are at peace, you understand, you're more at home there now than you are here.
Right.
Because you don't have that when you come back.
Right.
And it's almost like the veil has been lifted and they see something about us when they come back that we don't see.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm so
That means we have 2 minutes.
okay. Biscuits are done. So I'm interested in hearing what you think about using that same kind of framework that you're using now in the incarceration system, where I am currently working on a project called Fostering Incarceration, and it takes a look at the foster care to incarceration pipeline.
Yep.
And I'm so interested in seeing how you think that art and the framework that you use it can kind of help aid those people who have been marginalized in those ways.
Well, I think it goes back to really identifying a root cause and then recognizing what a specific response to that cause could be.
Right.
It's a terrific way to think about how you can, in the words of one of our appropriators, from a Republican staff who said, "I love the way that you're using art as a weapon that you're aiming at something specific."
Right.
And have you thought about how you could aim that somewhere else?
Yeah.
And so that's where I've really been excited about how if we can really get a better system of recognizing what the benefits and impacts are, both at a medical level, but also at a community level.
Right.
And then recognize the unique needs of the target population. And I think
Right.
this is a really good one for the arts
Yeah.
because just the meaning making and sense making of art, depending on how you're prompting it,
Yeah.
can help you reimagine yourself in context of the new sense of purpose and aspiration that you might have. I think
Yeah.
it's been really, I've seen it, at least for me, resonate really well for people coming out of this, emotional and discombobulating transition from combat.
Yeah.
And PTS,
Right.
using this stuff to calm your neural network firing. And I mean, there's PTS
Right.
going from incarcerated to,
Of course.
and how you
Yeah.
how you succeed afterwards. So I think being able to take some of these lessons in one place and being able to understand how it could be applied there, it's a huge issue. It's a huge societal problem, and it deserves our attention.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Again. So we met it on an elevator when steam was just being birthed, I think, at a RISD thing.
That's right. You stole my opening line. You know, a theater producer and a medical doctor walk into an elevator.
Right.
30 seconds later, they walk out and they see a vision of how to bring the arts into medicine.
A future
right?
together, right? So tell us real quickly who you are for those who haven't done the research as well as our last guest has.
Sure. So I'm Jeremy Nobel, and I'm a medical doctor, public health practitioner, and a poet, but also the founder of the Foundation for Art and Healing, whose mission is to explore and promote the idea that creative arts expression improves health and well-being for individuals and community, an idea that I think goes over pretty well in this audience, but still needs a lot of promotion in the outside world.
Right. So we had 3 prompts to think about for this long table conversation. It's actually kind of it's a little triangular table, but and I just want to start on the first one on like what are things we could do at the smallest level to think about the kinds of transformation that we want to be working towards.
Yeah, I thought that was a great question. You know, often we're invited to think big. The E. Cummings quote, always the beautiful answer. Where are the more beautiful questions? You know, and I think questions are small, and the right question can kind of change the world. So thanks for asking that question. You know, I think it does go to the heart of what we've been involved in at the Foundation for the last 2 or 3 years, and you brought it up in your last comments, which is really looking at loneliness and social isolation as a fundamental personal and public health issue. And so as you start unwinding that a little bit, it really gets to the heart of much of what's already been talked about today, which is we are hardwired for connection. And when politics and society and culture remove us from ourselves and from other people, our health suffers. And not only health, you know, in our personal sense, although I'll talk a little bit more about that, but in world health, our connection to others, our recognition of others, our ability to have empathy for others begins to deteriorate.
Right.
So when you talk about the small thing, and I think the arts have a lot to do with it, the small thing I think all of us can do, and this is where the arts can help, is to be in the moment and pay more attention. I think it starts with that.
You brought up a quote that I was thinking about in these prompts, and you probably know E.O. Wilson, evolutionary biologist, and there's 2 things that he put his finger on in this book, The Eusocial Conquest of Earth, that I think connects with all of this. One is that human beings, termites, and ants are the 3 species, and the only 3 species that by default will sacrifice themselves for the sake of the larger. And that is a really interesting, you know, thing. The other thing is that we've evolved in a way that we, you know, have developed these Star Wars technologies, but we drive them with Stone Age emotion. And, you know, instantly you would think about weapons and laser guns and things like that, but information systems seems to be a Star Wars technology that we're slipping on like ice now. You know, when we think about how we've developed these social media platforms and how the whole journalism platforms are kind of reorganizing themselves, it almost feels like we're losing a sense of connection to something that we used to understand, and now we're trying to rebuild it. And does that come into the work at all in terms of isolationism, in terms of the 21st century sort of social platforms that we're operating on?
No question it does. I mean, so digital connectivity, what does that really mean? 6,000 friends on Facebook, but who's bringing you lunch tomorrow if you're sick at home, right? So we have a growing sense that whatever that connection is digitally, it might be quite important. It isn't fully serving the needs we have or that society has. Talk about E.O. Wilson. He's a wonderful biologist. He's at Harvard. I've enjoyed being there on the faculty for a number of years also. And I think what he speaks to really goes back to, or why we are so hardwired for connection. So let's go back 70,000 years, and you hear a sound in the bushes, and well, maybe that's a saber-toothed tiger, you know, and our brain is an organ for threat detection. We're on it, we're on it, we're on it. So you pick up a stick, right, saying, okay, I got to defend myself. Wouldn't you feel better if there are 10 people around you also picking up sticks?
Yep.
And I think it's as simple as that. And so as we wall ourselves away from other people who can help us, this biological phenomenon called fight or flight or freeze goes into action. And so we're always, if we don't think anyone's got our back, if we think we're at risk and no one's there to help us, pick up a stick to defend us against a threat, or help us survive in some way, our entire biology, in a non-helpful way that increases blood pressure, reduces immune response, and so on, is turned up a little bit.
Yep.
Which actually leads to one of the real important observations of just over the last few years about how toxic stress related to loneliness and social isolation actually is. Some very compelling epidemiology started coming out showing that loneliness had an increased risk of early death of 30%. Put that in perspective for the non-epidemiologist, non-public health types, that's smoking. And so the quote that is often used, it's put out by Julianne Holt-Lundstedt, a phenomenal epidemiologist, that being lonely is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Wow. And you think about how we look at how we look at smoking as a major public and personal health issue, and then we look at loneliness as a mild mood disorder that you're going to get over, you know, if you just, you know, suck it up.
Right.
And so that's really kind of what's got attention really on the loneliness issue, and opens up some important opportunities for creative arts to be useful, to form authentic and sustainable connection. And that's the heart of what the Unloneliness Project and your work too is promoting.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the real challenge there is to see that there is potential for the arts to play a role, but also not to be lazy and think that all arts is going to cure that. So if we think about how well you've been kind of honing in on that root problem and understanding what those issues are, have you thought a little bit about, I'm sure you have, share your thoughts about what types of specific responses or interventions could we be thinking about that would be an effective way to aim our weapon at that?
Yeah. So if the problem is loneliness and lack of connection, the solution is connection. So how do we achieve it? And how do we achieve it at scale, recognizing diversity, challenge, trauma, and all those things? And you said it earlier, and I think it's been the basis of a lot of the effective work in post-traumatic stress and so on, is let us figure out how to find, shape, and share our personal narratives, our personal stories.
Right.
And the arts are incredibly powerful for that, whether you're a professional artist or not. It tends to break through the emotional barrier many of us have of guilt and shame about being vulnerable, about recognizing and declaring our story.
So you're just hitting on something that was there's a bell. I'm not going to do my dance, though. One of the things about having the privilege of doing this work with military folks coming in, everybody who does it, it's embedded in their team approach of integrative care. Everybody who comes in gets it. Is given the thing, it's mandatory, mask making and music therapy, et cetera. One of the things that really has changed my whole perception of who is an artist, why do they do it, and what do they get out of it? And this, I think, goes back to Mr. Rubenstein's comments at the top in terms of how it's, I have been conditioned to think of the arts sector as being a certain tribe of people, really, over here. And when you think about how the arts intersects with everybody.
Right, so let me pick up on everybody, because a big focus of the Unlonely Project call to action is to take creative expression as a way to find and share your story broadly, away from the traditional centers of arts activities and into workplaces, college campuses, community centers for older adults. Draw on arts organizations for support, for help, for assistance. But bridge that gap.
And capacity.
Right, because unless we normalize creative expression as a daily activity, we're going to fall behind.
Yep.
And one of the things we were prompted to ask about in terms of what does success look like and so on, so I thought about that. So how about if at some point when you go in to see your primary care physician And in addition to asking about your diet and exercise, she asks you, is there a creative activity that matters to you? Tell me about it.
Yep. Cool. I think we'll end on the applause line. Do you? How do we transition?
No, that's
out of
great.
this?
I think
Okay.
we're moving on to another piece of theater.
Yep.
Let's hear it again for all of our morning conversationalists. We were really excited to try out this new format, and at this point, we're actually going to invite our morning guests to rejoin for a group conversation. So at this time, our good friend and colleague, Damien Wetzel, who's the director of the Aspen Institute Arts Program and incoming president of the Juilliard School, will be moderating. After this conversation, we will take a brief break before getting into the next round of conversations this morning. So, Damien.
Overwhelming. We could do a full day on each one of those 10-minute conversations, but we're going to actually try to have some synthesis or at least some conversation amongst everyone. So I just want to say some hellos before we start, though. Sorry. Hey, Damien.
Great to meet you.
Pleasure.
Hi,
Nice
Angelique.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Your job is working.
Great. Ring your bell. Hello, Jasmine. I'm going to be on the end.
You're going to be at the end,
Yeah,
so we'll
I'm
go
gonna
right
be
there.
there.
Jasmine will go there.
Hello. Jeremy, nice to meet you. Hey, Bill.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay. Are we complete? I think we are. Okay. I've had some moderating duties in my day, but this one's, I don't even know where to begin. But you know what? I think the best thing we could do is to have some sort of free-flowing conversation among everybody. I'm sure everybody had things that they heard that sparked, different levels of engagement. But one of the last things that was said really related to kind of a meta idea of it all is affected by how we think and the processes by which we approach things. So maybe that's something we all share. And for me, as someone who trained as a dancer very specifically to try and do things, if not correctly, specifically, I wanted to have a way of doing something that I could rely on. But I quickly learned that that was not the way to get to heaven. That, perfection as a goal cuts down the possibilities that we all have. So how we think, how we approach things on every level, from, I heard so many things that I just loved. I'm looking for Mark. Is he? Well, I'm going to talk about him. Paraphrase, pedagogically choreographed social justice. I mean, I'm taking that to the bank. I just cannot wait to start engaging with people about just that idea. And then beyond that, what I consider this group to be is a department of inspiration. So I wonder if we could just start out by, those questions that we were all discussing in one way or another. What's a small thing? What's a big thing that we can all do? But I'm wondering that, from my point of view, I think creating a department of inspiration in the new life I'm heading towards at Juilliard is a tremendous counter of sorts to the natural gravity of perfectionism at a place like Juilliard. So I'm walking away with that. Yeah. I'm going, okay, I have that. So maybe we could just start talking about, maybe the good doctor could lead us off a little bit. I mean, the things you heard today. I'm wondering, like, the attention that you're giving to loneliness, for instance, and some of the other things that you heard today. Is there something that comes out at you that you say, that phrase, couldn't we at least do this? Is there some small intervention?
Right. I mean, and so what's ironic is often these small interventions that sound small become the powerful forces that can change the world in the ways that I think we're all excited to see happen. And so when I think, couldn't we just tolerate the discomfort of vulnerability long enough to share with people who we are? And I think that creative arts, you don't have to be a professional artist, to bypass some of the brain circuitry that gets in the way. And we've done brain scans on this of literal, description of yourself, but you can draw it, you can move it, you could drum it, and share something that matters to you. And it's got to matter to you, and you've got to tolerate the discomfort of being vulnerable, of letting something that matters to you out, or you don't get the payoff.
Mhm.
And that's a critical kind of, it's not just, just jot something down and share it, because I think where the payoff is in tolerating, is in letting yourself experience the discomfort of vulnerability and moving through it. As Robert Frost said, the only way past is through.
Yeah.
And just keep going.
So that's a very personal idea. I think we can all kind of imagine ourselves taking a step in that direction. But I was going to go to, maybe Angelique, you could talk about the systems necessary to create that opportunity. And so much of the work I've done in schools, for instance, that's a huge moment. That moment where a child will be vulnerable enough to learn, to actually participate, to take that step. How do you,
I mean, I think we have to rethink our personal architecture and the way that we function in the world, but also the systemic architecture around us in those spaces. If my couldn't we just would be, couldn't we just admit that none of us really know how to talk about race, and none of us really know how to understand racism. That it's the foundation of our country, it's what we've built our country on, but it's the weapon that's going to dismantle our country if we don't learn how to talk about race and racism. And so it's so insipid and it's so well designed that now we actually need to educate ourselves. We need to get the decoder glasses on so that we can see it when it manifests. And I don't think that it's a challenge for white people, although it is. I mean, I think that that's a huge part of it. But when we host anti-racism trainings in Chicago, what I always say is, as important as it is for white people, people who have come to be called white, who are Irish and Italian and all, to come and to understand how systemic inequity doesn't work for them, I think it's more important for people of color. Because we've internalized all of these messages. We've internalized them. And then many of us are in these positions of power, and we are gatekeepers, where we think that we're there to sort of help communities, but often the way we function in these places is to keep community out. And so it is always the unspoken in different conversations. And I think it stops vulnerability. And I agree, I think that we want a connection. We're longing for connection. I talk about being raised in Chicago. My mother was a Chicago public school teacher. I think there are teachers in the audience today. Yes.
All right.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I
My
love
father was a
teachers.
Chicago police officer. And he was black and she was white, Jewish. They both have passed away now. I think that there are these assumptions of difference that are there. But actually, I think through learning and understanding how racism has done a number on all of us, there are so many paths forward that lead to that connection.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could just come right down here to you, Jasmine, and talk a little bit as a young person who, you're a really old young person. Oh my God, you just did, at 15, you took on the responsibility to actually lead, which is the essence of vulnerability, to put yourself out there. So congratulations on that. And I would imagine that, I know you missed some of the beginning of the conversation, but you've been catching up fast, I think. When you go back home, what are you taking with you today as maybe kind of a couldn't we just?
Can you get it? Is it on? Hello?
They'll get it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they'll get it. Yeah.
I think that as a young person, one of the most important things that I needed and I need at this point in my life is knowing that there are people who care. When I started the magazine, I was 15 years old, and I couldn't even sign the checks for my own nonprofit, right? My mom had to do that. And so when you show people or tell young people that there are adults that care and want to help and want to support you, that's where that connection comes from, and that's where that courage comes from to keep going. I was fortunate enough to have people in my life who encouraged my creativity and who encouraged my imagination and wanting to be innovative. But I know that there's a lot of young people out there who don't have that support system. And so in order to help them, I think that we could all go home, go talk to a young person and let them know that we believe in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that sounds like it should go right to you. Linda, as you look at the landscape of education, how much parenting is education? How much of that level of nurturing do you think? I mean, you said some amazing things earlier about, you know, the nature of education being love and the way that we have to approach our young people with that spirit to get Jasmine doing that.
I was so inspired by you, and I was so inspired by when you said we have to normalize talking about race and racism. So I've been at this a long time, and I think until we, you said that as well, until we learn to flex our race muscles, we're all poorer for it. But for me, schools are about love. Schools are about possibilities. I think we have a lot of work to do in really revolutionizing our schools. The schools we have today should not be the schools we have tomorrow. You know, the saying goes, and Jeremy, you may have heard this, a doctor comes back from 100 years ago, goes into a hospital, and nothing's the same. A teacher comes back from 100 years ago, guess what? Everything's the same, including the way subjects are taught. So we love to think about STEAM, but you know, I still was the first high school principal to have a STEAM lab in her school. How many high schools or middle schools have STEAM labs? Probably I can count them on 2 hands, not enough. So we have a lot to do to change the way we're thinking about education. And you know, I sort of have 2 things I harp on. One is, and I'm very extreme on this, one is we must abolish high-stakes testing. We cannot live in a world. I believe in standards. Standards I believe in. Tests I believe in, but not high stakes. And I know for you as a dancer, and I've seen your work and seen you with kids, testing and high stakes are really different things.
Yes.
And we've gone off on the wrong way. And you know, our current Secretary of Education sadly understands none of that. But I'm very extreme in saying we must fight this, because what's happened is our curriculum has been reduced to nothing. So we don't think anymore about the power of shop, building.
Yeah, making.
Kids need to make and build. So all I harp on now is I'm working with creative leaders in my organization. I'm working with a wonderful school, conservatory lab. You'll see the kids later today. They'll perform. They get an hour of music a day. I want that for every child. You can't do that. If you're in elementary schools today, we started testing in Massachusetts last week. We will not finish till the end of May. Come on, people. We can change that. So I'm not sure love will change that, but we citizen artists must change that.
I think love is probably the only thing that'll change it, because the love brings the empathy for the experience of growing as people and growing as a society, getting to where we want to get to. Hank, I mean, you said so many things. I'm just a huge fan, so I'm just going to, fanboy for a minute here. But, when you actually got pretty specific and said, I think, what would you say, how to do some stuff. Just the mechanics.
DC Public Schools.
Yeah. Do some stuff to get to where you need to get to. You're operating on such an enormously high plane creatively and thinking and trying to share, and then it's like, I just need to not take that type of time away to do all the mechanics in that. And that's systemic in some ways, speaking to, to Angelique's world, how that can happen, and I hope she brought some cash for you. Did you, with a project like 50 States, 4 Freedoms, I mean, there's a lot of couldn't we just every day, I would imagine. How do we get started here? How do we turn the dial? Do you have anything coming out of this conversation that you find might enlighten others who can think on a grand scale? Because most people don't allow themselves to.
I mean, I think we have to be both inspired, but I think more than anything, we need to be scared. When we recognize that our survival is at stake, we're willing to take risks that we might not otherwise take. Sometimes we can be hasty, but sometimes we need to actually find ways to both be alarmed, to be scared, but also take breaths and be intentional. And I think when I say that, it's because I recognize how much of a desperate situation we've brought ourselves to, thinking that it was someone else's job to write the laws, to create the policies, and that we have, in large part, been derelict in our responsibility, thinking that I can't think of my creative practice as in helping to build our society. And I think that my art school, we had 3 hours of art every day. We got out of school, got in at 8:30 and got out at 5 p.m. and never thought about wanting to go home. And that's because it was this really integrated system of recognizing how art and academics can be married. And I think what I really hope that we can find a way of doing together is learning to look at total strangers and tell them we love them without being afraid of what comes back. And the reason that we need to learn how to do that is because it is scary. Because coming back to the Loneliness Project, we're afraid of that rejection, and their fear of us not loving them is what I think the project of race does. Race is a divide and conquer strategy. I do think we need to find a way to abolish race as a concept, because you can't believe in race without being racist. There will always be white supremacy as long as we categorize people off of these imaginary lines and borders that really don't speak to much outside of this cultural, current American context. So that's not to speak to ethnicity and the multiple identities that exist within all of us. And I think we need to find the ways to bridge those gaps and find out and recognize that we all have more things in common than we do that separates us.
Beautifully said. I know I heard one bell. I'm going to carry on. There's a lot of areas that I'd love to have you talk about, Bill, but I want to go to the work with veterans for a moment. Because we're talking about, very specifically to human beings who have been through trauma, who have a damage that you're addressing through the work of the arts. And I've had some work with, my work with Arthur Bloom and Music Corps, which speaks very much to the making. It's literally about the practicing that has that effect. But when maybe we take a step back and we think about all the things that are being said here, there's forms of damage all around us that we are trying for that more perfect union in every single way we're doing. Are there some lessons from that work maybe you could think about?
I constantly feel like the moments of realization and inspiration that resonate out of that work individually for people who are going through the programs has associated ways of being applied to just about everything that we're talking about here. I think it also goes back to what you said at the very beginning of the, as you were formulating your takeaway on this in regards to, I guess the way I would look at it, and this work definitely embodies it, that you're asking about the military work. It almost always starts with somebody saying, okay, I'm not an artist, laughing kind of it, but I hear it'll help, and they're there to get something done. They want to get better for their families. They want to get better to do what they want to do. So they pick up the pen or they pick up the brush and they do it. And I just sit there and watch them perform the meaning-making, sense-making for a sense of real purpose in a way that's as good as anything I've ever done, including producing on Broadway. And that gets to I think the thing that you were talking about, and this is sort of an internal struggle, I think, at the NEA in the same way that it would be at the Juilliard, the product versus the process, the sense of excellence and the comparative excellence. I think it's really important for us to understand excellence, to be able to define it and to be able to recognize it, but then also to understand how that embodies all of us, and that we think about process like you're talking about in terms of broadening the participation of how people employ this for their own human development, as your community around your magazine is doing. And that's really the point. So then you have a real need for the excellent stuff to be recognized and shared, but it's not just necessarily a comparative thing where, you know, the purpose of the arts can sometimes feel like the ability to make stars out of people and to understand how to fall in love with what they do and to recognize why that's better than that. And I think that it's the process in making versus product, and we still want to celebrate the best and understand how to get there, but also keep it connected to the broader, you know, whether you want to call it broader participation or equity or whatever, it depends on where you stand. But I think there's a lot broader audience interested in that than in the ways that we can sometimes, you know, emotionally react to the problems that we're facing.
I would just what? No, wait. I would just say that that idea of, you know, a doctor saying, you know, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but what's your creativity like? How are you on your creativity? Is a universal goal. I think that is, you know, we're talking about education, health, and, you know, finite resources today. That is the whole thing. It is like, how deeply are you actually living? Thank you all. Thank you. Great.
Now we get a bio break, right?
So I just wanted to take a quiet moment to say not just how thoughtful, but how vulnerable and honest everyone was. So we thank you for your time and your expertise. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to give them a thunderous round of applause to show gratitude. And then you have a 15-minute break. So we want to be back here by 11:30 because there's a really great start to the next section. So thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I will commit to it.
Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up jump out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising bane of my own existence. Strange, a defeat is deranged. Add that multiplied by my demon. The pain's so egregious, but strategic. I came to rise about the flame like a phoenix. My words will reach 1 million or more when I tweet it. That's as many people as MLK and Jesus. And half the time, people rhymes of a genius who refuses to align with the elitist. Seems Dr. King's dreams were not for the squeamish. Children of a lesser God. Oppression gets repeated unless we slide up out of the chains and delete it. America is like black and white dice tumbling. Any day you can bite the dust. Another one. So while our culture is crumbling, I will enunciate every line clearly so you can hear what the f I'm saying, no mumbling it. Rise. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames. Rise to power or fall from grace. The often cases are heads in the clouds or we're lost in space. Citizens of the divided states identify with hatred. For our demise, they watch and wait. Look at the downward spiral, it's going viral. Nobody's ever accountable. Who's held liable? If anyone could correspond, if they so inclined to, it's sad. They want a borderline redefine you. As a people, we can rise like the tides do the tower over evil as a nation under God. Indivisible is visceral, the way we're all at odds, but together we'll survive. Just never sever ties, we can rise to a brilliance, rise to a balance, rise to a way to coexist in non-violence, rise to a volume that's impossible to silence. In the morning when I rise to the challenge. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames, rising up out of the flames.
Thank you very kindly, my very dear friend. Never in the history of this nation have so many people been for the cause of freedom and human dignity. Now let me say this, keep this movement going, keep this movement rolling. Long as we keep moving like we are moving, the power structure will have to give in. In spite of the difficulties, and we're going to have a few more difficulties, keep climbing, keep moving. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames like a phoenix. Rising up out of the flames. The thing that we are challenged to do is to keep this movement moving. There is power in unity and there's power in numbers.
We pointing fingers at each other, steady missing the point. I got a homie serving time just for rolling the joint. Who got the power over your life? Is it the whites or the corpse that paid Congress that gave them the rights? They got cameras on every corner while they turn off your lights. Your sister on the internet selling for likes. If I get shot down like Martin Luther, the sad is, man, I probably knew the shooter. A visionary never gets to live to see the future. See, I was a consumer, but now I'm a producer. Cointel Pro, J. Edgar Hoover. 21st century vote, we love Larry Hoover. Black versus white versus brown is a maneuver. It's rich versus the poor and God versus the computer. You go to City Hall, but the mayor's gone. Some people took my granny's house, took your trailer home. Who's the enemy?
You had a right to remain silent, so I suggest you stay silent.
Cause the cannon will be held against you. Can you afford somebody to defend you? Huh? You can have a jury of your peers, but still gonna get your 20 years. Yeah, you had a right to remain silent. So I suggest you stay silent. Let's make a school. Let's build our own school. ADD is a myth. They teach kids to lose. Medicating our leaders. They only want the elitists to lead us. McDonald's, I never let a clown feed us. Let's make a temple, synagogue, a mosque. Pray in every direction and see if it get to God. She the way to the top and didn't get the job. She kept clicking her heels, couldn't get out of eyes. When your house ain't yours, but you got a nice car, that's how I know that you poor. When you love outdoors and you scream white power, that's how I know that you poor. Wow, we at war. They putting poison in the water while they fracking the floor. Rockefellers, Koch brothers, Rothschilds, and more got you distracted from the worth fighting for. You had a right to remain silent, so I suggest you stay silent. Cause the cannon will be held against you. Can you afford somebody to defend you? Huh? You can have a jury of your peers, but still gonna get your 20 years. Yeah, you had a right to remain silent, so I suggest you stay silent.
Do you know what you came here for? Do you recognize? Do you realize the light? No doubt indeed. I know what you're aching for. Everything has a price. If you can see the light, then fight. Do you know what you came here for? Do you recognize? Do you realize the light? I know what you're aching for. Everything has a price. If you can see the light, then fight.
We living in a revolutionary age. Our people got nothing to lose but our chains. Modern day slaves barely make a living wage. Overworked and underpaid, and someday it's gonna change. That's what they always say, we go to vote in vain. Supposed to be the land of the free, home of the brave. Got my mind thinking like a rebel in the Hunger Games. Catch a fire, get your bow and arrow, set this world in flames. I say a prayer with my elders, burning sage on this warrior path. May we be unafraid, cause long as the system is wrong, I won't behave. Power, we coming for ours, Trump better tuck his chain. They gravy train came straight from my slavery chain. Sweating in the field with machetes, cutting sugar cane. I can hear the ancestors crying out from the grave. The struggle you endured for us wasn't done in vain. I know what I'm for, and I know what I'm against. My intentions is pure, I'm not riding the fence. If it ain't about power, then it don't make sense. We tired of letting it slide, our people getting lynched. And it's already red level on the pressure gauge. Any second it could blow like a hand grenade. All these schools whack out the youth disengaged. Bloods and Crips walking around in a purple haze. Killing ourselves like wolves licking on a blade. Young bloods, we need to come together under one brigade. Love coming back again, hate going down the drain. Revolution on the way, it just might be today, but it's gonna be okay.
Do you know what you came here for? Do you recognize? Do you realize the light? I know what you're aching for. Everything has a price. If you can see the light, then fight.
I wake up, battle fatigued, and reach for the trees. Doc told me it's PTSD. Post-traumatic slave, military grade. I wanna grab the gauge, but I take it day to day. Hood like Beirut, homies gone too soon. Is it hands up, don't shoot, or Kim Jong-un? North Korea or Iraq, I'm an American or black. We give our life for this country, so I take a leave with cap. See, I know what I came for, I see the light. Cause we still standing, yeah, I paid the price. Do you realize
If you can see the light, then fight.
Yeah, that's nice.
I see them marching. Can't you see the soldiers? I see them marching. I see 10 soldiers, I hear them coming. We're finally on out. This summer I hear the drumming. We're dead in Ohio. Never know when the drama coming. Like a soldier up early in the morning running. PT, stay sharp on my calisthenics. No weed smoke, clean mind and a clear spirit. Off a peace, but I keep a peace close near me. It's real life, homie, not a conspiracy theory. Shots fired, police getting away with it. Even when the camera dead on them, so you know they did it. It's not war till we fight back, it's just slaughter. Time to lace up the boots and walk like warriors. In our homes, in our streets, in our neighborhoods. Can't wait till Marines in your neighborhood. We need a people army on deck across cultures. Guerrilla soldiers calling all levels, all focus. Pick your target in your battles, we don't need martyrs. We need a squad of the bravest and smallest and hardest. Soldiers, I hear them coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. We're dead in Ohio. We're marching in Memphis. We're marching in Selma. Chicago. We're marching in Watts.
Born in with a battle cry. Peace of mind been demolished since I emerged bloody from out of the amniotic violence. I get my environment and I'm the product. Got the blood of freedom fighters flowing deep in my carotid. I'm deep for my media feed. RIPs on IG, so I'm camouflaging how I grieve. My heart beating, I'm on a minute on my sleeve. I'm trapped between anguish and anger like wild creatures. Daddy told me either you fight or you die speechless. That's why I bring the spirit of Ali through my speakers. Power verse the people like trees and small cleavers. So we ball a fist and keep chopping till we see justice. They try to silence the movement before it started, but it's a million voices screaming through an epiglottis. From the students of Soweto to the ghettos and the projects, we gon' keep pushing the needle till we progress. We need some soldiers.
We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. We're dead in Ohio. We're marching in New Orleans. We're marching in DC. We're marching in Charlottesville. We're marching in New York City. We're marching. We marching in Watts. We marching Compton, DC, Oakland. ATL, I see you. We marching in Milwaukee, Ferguson, Flint, New Orleans, Grand Rapids, New York City, Selma. Can't forget Tuskegee, Charlottesville.
Can't stay late 60s, fueled by hate. This ain't no Malcolm versus Martin debate. Who can relate when the brothers get lynched and the blacks shoot back in the crack?
Teachers on strike, no more school today. They want more money, but the board won't pay. Everybody's talking about ecology. The air's so polluted that it's hard to breathe. But that's what makes the world go round. The ups and downs, a carousel. Changing people's heads around. Go underground, young men. People make the world go round. Old folks judge you by the clothes you wear. They swear you a hippie if you have long hair. Young politicians fight for poverty, while people still cry for equality. But that's what makes the world go round. The ups and downs, the carousel. Changing people's heads around.
All right, friends, if I can ask you to return to your seats. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What a morning so far, right? Wow. And we have more to come. And this is just the morning segment. It's really a privilege to introduce our next performer and one of our conversationalists. Mr. Matt Gould is a composer, performer, and also co-director of the Uganda Project. And we're so thrilled that he is with us this morning. So let's do another round of applause for our next guest. Thank you.
Thank you. There it is. Hi, everybody. How you all doing? Yes. It's really good to be in Washington, D.C., home of the Watergate scandal. Yes, I got to stay at the Watergate Hotel last night, and I did create a little bit of a scandal of my own. I had to be here very early this morning for sound check, and so I thought I would sort of treat myself with that thing where you put the breakfast order on the door where they charge you like $40 for toast. And so I had come back from that dinner, I had undressed, I'm in my, boxers, and I go out the door really quick to put the thing on the door. Yes, the door latches shut. This is true. I'm like on the 8th floor, hallway of the Watergate. I'm like, there's got to be a phone by the elevators. I run to the elevators. Nobody has a phone anymore. I have to speak at the Kennedy Center tomorrow. This is mortifying. I run back to the room. I knock on the door across the hall. I'm like, please let it be a dude. Please let it be a dude. Please let it be a dude. My worst nightmare, it's a British lady. She's like, can I help you? I'm like, I'm so sorry I locked myself out of my room. Can you just please call downstairs and get them to send somebody? She's like, oh my God, this is classic. This is classic. Is she here? Is that British lady here? Is that she's gotta she isn't here. It's true. True story. So that was my welcome to DC. I'm really glad to be here. Yes. So I've been thinking a lot lately about how we wind up in the places where we wind up. Every one of us here today wound up at the Kennedy Center because of a million different little tiny choices that we made over days, weeks, months, years that brought us here. And one of the choices that I made that brought me here today was that I, about 18 years ago, joined the Peace Corps. And I went to, do we have Peace Corps people in the house? Yes, hello. They sent me to the Islamic Republic of Mauritania in West Africa. And when I went to West Africa with my Bachelor of Fine Arts from Boston University, I believed that the problems of Africa existed because Matt Gould had not yet shown up to fix them. True. And I got there and very quickly realized that I was not going to get to be the great white savior that I wanted to be. But a group of young women at the school where I was teaching said to me, Mamadou, they called me Mamadou, Minjidi Wade Teatro, we want to do a play. I was like, that's my shit, I got you, what do you want to do? Said, we want to do a play about forced marriage. That was something they were dealing with. I said, I have just the play. It's called Romeo and Juliet. It's by William Shakespeare. You're going to love it. Do you know this? They were like, Mingandadum, we don't know this play. I said, just trust me, it's going to be amazing. So we go through weeks and weeks of rehearsal. We're rehearsing this play. We get to the night of the performance. We're out there in the middle of the Sahara Desert, rolling sand dunes. No electricity. But on our school's soccer field, there's a goal post, and we hang a light bulb off the end of the goal post, and this light bulb is run by a car battery. And my young women are performing this play, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to solve the problems of the world, but we're going to end forced marriage tonight in this village thanks to Shakespeare. And they're doing this play, and we get to the penultimate scene where the actress playing Romeo comes in and she sees Juliet and she thinks she's dead, and she calls up to the heavens, oh Allah, hol sababu awadidum Allah, berenderam and amusi, and she takes her knife and thrusts it into her chest and falls down dead on the sand. And then Juliet wakes up, because she was never dead in the first place, and she sees Romeo lying there, and she goes, oh Allah, hol sababu awadidum Allah, berenderam and amusi, and she takes Romeo's knife and she thrusts it into her chest. And as she's falling down to the ground towards the sand, you hear the audience start screaming, "Secunduma, Juliet! Secunduma, Juliet! Your hair, Juliet! Your hair!" And Juliet reaches into her dress, pulls out a handkerchief, whips it out onto the sand, and takes her braids to the side and lightly falls down dead on the handkerchief. Now, my black friends in the audience, no. Do not get sand in the hair. For my white friends, now you know, stay woke, okay? So, after my 2-year Peace Corps service, many years later, I went back to Mauritania. I went back to visit my friends there, and many of those girls had been married off. That's what they do. And they said to me, "Mamadou, Ayejitani kofati Romeo e Juliet e Sukundu Mako." Do you remember Romeo and Juliet and her hair? And that was the thing that stuck with them. And it taught me a really important lesson, something that people have been talking about today, that sometimes it's not about building those grand institutions, making those grand gestures that hopefully maybe will save the world. Sometimes it's not even about the play. Sometimes it's not about what you do, but how you do it that actually has an impact. And it's something that stayed with me, that working with a group of young ladies on a play that turned out to be about hair was the thing that we all have in common. And it's something that I try to remember in my work. There is a long invisible thread that wraps around my heart and wraps around your head, tightens its grip when things go unsaid, and I can't break free. Let go, let me, little boy, break free. Leave him out on his own, let him find his way home. Can't take all this pain on your shoulder, only weighs you all down when you're older. Let him run, let him fly. If you love him, then don't cry tonight. Let him learn all he can, so when he comes home again, he'll be a better man. And there is a long invisible thread that wraps around my heart and wraps around your head. It tightens his grip when things go unsaid, and I can't break free. Lord above, can you hear my prayer? If you know the answer, then make me aware of how to keep loving and how to still care and how to stay strong when I wanna be over there. Do I run? Do I fly? How can I love him and tell him goodbye? Do I learn all I can, so when I come home again, I'll be a better man? And there's a long invisible thread that wraps around my heart and wraps around your head. It tightens its grip when things go unsaid, and I can't break free. No, I can't break free, and I can't break free. No, I can't break free. Thank you, guys. So I get to leave you with one more little ditty today. Before I do, I should just say, usually I get to come and do these things with my dear, beautiful husband, Griffin Matthews, who I wrote that last song with. It comes from our show, Witness Uganda, which is about his experience as an African American living abroad in Uganda, trying to change the world, messing a lot of stuff up, running into all kinds of problems about race, and those problems exist everywhere. He's not here today, not because we're getting divorced. We're all good. But Griff and I just became foster daddies Yes. We're really excited. We after a whole lot of training and paperwork and home study, about 2 weeks ago, our social worker called and she said, guys, you're approved. It'll be 2 or 3 more weeks, and then you'll have a baby. And we were like, that's perfect. We have a concert in New York. We got to go to the Kennedy Center. After that, we'll be ready. 2 hours later, she called and said, guys, we got a baby. Are you ready? And we were like, no. We're not, told Mario we're going to be at the Kennedy Center. We're not ready. And we sat across the table from each other and we went, oh my God, we're trying to play God right now. We're trying to dictate and mandate when this baby's going to show up in our lives. And it was another lesson to us that, you don't get to choose when the call comes. The call comes when the call has to come. And listening to a lot of those speakers today, again, a lot of times I think we're like, what are we going to do to change the world? And what a lot of those speakers keep saying is like, it's happening right in front of you. It's like this thing right now, what you're doing right now, that's the thing. That's the call. And I always say this about our work in Uganda. I always say we go over there thinking we're going to teach them so much and they end up teaching us. And when we went to pick up that little baby boy, that lesson that he gave us in that first 2 seconds, that lesson of love that he gave us, that when the call comes, you just have to answer the call. It always comes at the wrong time, but it is always the right time. And this song is for our little boy, Galileo Love. And it's something I wrote before he was even on this earth. But the art usually knows sooner than you know. So this is for Galileo. In 1921, Henry Ford said, Jews are a threat to us. We must end their domination. 1931, Adolf Hitler said, Jews must be turned to dust. Henry Ford's my inspiration. Ford wasn't the one to pull the lever on the gas chamber, but his words echo like weeds they grew in the minds of the masses, inspired assassins. We say we never forget, then we forget. We forget, we forget. We say that he'll never win, he'll never win, he'll never win, he'll never win. But his words are out there, prepare. First words, then warfare. We say we never forget, then we forget, we forget, we forget. It's like an echo, 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 echo. Echo, 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 echo. In 2016, Donald Trump said, all of the brown people in our nation threaten our freedom. In 2017, who will stand up and say, Donald was right, build that wall, we don't need them. Trump won't be the one to pull the lever on the gas chamber, but his words echo, 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 like weeds they grow in the minds of the masses, inspire assassins. We say we never forget, then we forget, we forget, we forget. We say, well, he'll never win, he'll never win, he'll never win, he'll never win. But his words are out there, prepare. First words, then warfare. We say we never forget, then we forget, we forget, we forget. It's like an echo, 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 echo. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. You can sing this. Choose war. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. Again. Choose war or grace. Choose war. Two more of these. Come on. Choose war or grace. Choose war or grace. We are one human race. Choose war or We say, well, he'll never win. He'll never win. No, he'll never win. He'll never win. No, but his words are out there. Prepare, first words, then warfare. We say we never forget. Then we forget. We forget. We forget. Oh, it's like an echo, echo, echo. Echo, echo, echo. Echo, echo, echo. Echo, echo, echo. We are an echo, echo, echo. Echo, echo, echo. Echo, echo, echo. What will be our echo, 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 echo? Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and congratulations to you and Griffin. We're so happy for you. Just in the brief 15-minute break we had, I don't know about you, but I had conversations with 5 people that told me 5 different stories about connections that they found in the room this morning that they either re-remembered, discovered anew, or completely just sort of blew their mind. They're like, I went to school with this person. They're an alumni. I know them from this place. Did any of you guys have that experience? Right? Yes, thank you. And I bring that up because that is one of the lovely side benefits of the Art Summit, is that these connections among people grow and we foster them and hopefully they sustain. And a brief story, my very best friend in the world, Rachel, went to BU for acting school and was a classmate of our friend here that just performed. And I didn't know Matt before this, but Rachel said, you need to know this artist, and happened to be on stage, on our Millennium stage downstairs a few months back with Griffin, and we were so impressed with the performance. I said, I think you're the perfect fit for the Art Summit. So you just never know when these connections are going to be made. So at this point, we are going to dive into our next long conversation, similar to this morning, but carrying that thread. So I'm going to welcome back Matt, and I also have another guest, Nicole Hudson, who is the Deputy Mayor for Racial Equity in St. Louis. So please welcome our next guest. I hope that was right.
Want them to bring the piano back out? Maybe we can do a set instead of having this conversation.
No, we need to talk to you.
I was fully back there adding harmonies to your awesome song.
We should have done an acapella thing.
We should have.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Am I on? You hear me? Okay.
Yeah. So I think you're supposed to.
I'm interviewing you.
But I want to ask before we go there.
Okay.
You touched on being a white man in the Peace Corps who went to this country of brown people, and I think you might have even used the words help, save, and fix. What was it like for you to come to the realization that that wasn't the thing?
Devastating.
Huh.
Devastating. I think we're taught in this country that, I should say, as a white guy, I'm taught in this country I can do anything.
Right.
And so when I very quickly learned that I couldn't do anything, that was soul-crushing for me. And I spent a lot of years really, really depressed. And it took, I say this to Griffin all the time, but it took meeting an African-American man who could go like, honey, you have lessons in there that are worth telling. It took his experience teaching me how to synthesize what that experience was.
Yeah.
And so yeah. Cool. Now you're married to, or you are getting married.
Yes.
Are we allowed to talk? Can we talk personally?
We can talk personally. Let's go.
You're getting married to a white man.
Yes, he's back there.
He's very attractive. Yes. Is that? Sorry.
I mean, I think I pick him well.
You
but,
do, girl. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So your work really centers around, racism, all these kinds of things, and we should talk specifically about that. But what are the conversations that you and he are having around the dinner table? Like, how do you reconcile that in your life?
Yeah. So it's interesting that I have always been, I think, one of the few or only people of color in most of the places that I've been growing up, save my family and extended family. My parents made choices that put us in environments where, you know, my sister and I were one of few or only. And, you know, it's interesting because my sister, you know, spent a year at Spelman, was Miss Spelman, AKA, like like fully in that space. And I've had a different experience. And so it's always very interesting to see that nurture versus nature and how that all plays out. But all that to say that he is not my first white boyfriend. He's also not my first white fiance. But that's a whole, hey.
Part
That
two.
is a whole other conversation. That is a whole other conversation. And this is the first relationship, I think, because of my work, because of where my work is, where we have had language to talk about how the political and economic structure of race works on us as individuals and how that finds its way into our relationship. We have both been exposed to, in St. Louis, there's an organization called Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training that has been doing their 2.5-day intensive anti-racism training in St. Louis. And there are probably about 800 to 1,000 people in St. Louis who've experienced the same 2.5-day intensive workshop over the last 3 years. And he and I have both been in and out of that workshop a number of times because we're kind of organizers for it and I use it in my work. And because of that, we are able to be in a conversation or be in a disagreement or an uncomfortable place and be like, you know what? This is my internalized racial oppression that has me, you know, letting you get away with this or beating up on myself about that. And he's able to say, you know, this is my internalized racial superiority that has me not centering, you know, you. And so like it has given a language to interact as in relationship, in the most intimate of relationship that I've never had before. And I've seen the same thing play out, you know, in meetings and in strategic policy situations where there's somebody in power or with a different piece of power that is from a different racial group than I am, and we're able to have that conversation and even strategize about who should be the one to say this and who should be the one to come behind this way because of the way race politics works and because of how all that plays out.
Is the answer to, you're in a political position now. You also have a theater background.
Yes.
So is the answer to the problems that we're experiencing in our cities right now, is it a political answer?
You know, I don't think you can have politics without understanding motivation, understanding how different disciplines and different points of view come together. Like, and you know, it could be that I'm a hammer and everything's a nail, but I feel like my theatrical background and training, and you know, I was a 5-year-old girl who knew she wanted to be a producer on Broadway, and I do not like it's a lot of the same skill set to understand, you know, which design needs to come first. How do these two things need to interplay? I've sat in rooms, especially over the last couple of years between Ferguson and the Stockley verdict, where there are political people who agree on what the people in the street are saying, and they're still not executing. It's because there's that gray area in between an idea and even an agreement and actual execution up against the structures that we have baked into our society. That is the stuff. And you need somebody or some pieces of bodies who are creative and are able to get out of their boxes and who can see the complexity to guide and push people through that. And so I think you could call it politics, but I think at its core, this artistic, creative approach is critical to getting us through. I mean, when you look at how, you know, that quote at the beginning, a couple people have come back to it, but racism is so entwined in America that when we protest racism, you know, people think we're protesting America. I don't understand how you solve any of what we are faced with today without going there. You know, you're gonna have an incomplete set of tools if you're gonna go after a solution that doesn't recognize the true diagnosis of the problem.
We got to talk last night a bunch, which was lovely. Are you generally hopeful about the direction that we're moving? I mean, the city that you live in, I read in an article you wrote, it's like 40% of the city is like Not you're looking at me like, oh God,
Like,
you're asking.
Which thing did I say?
Well, it's just you like. There's a lot of like turnover in that city. People are like, I mean, is there forward progress, or are we just taking the cycle around one more time again? What's going on?
Yeah, so we were talking yesterday how we went to the history of our National Museum for African American History, spent 7 hours over 2 days. And the thing I was struck with most was just how repetitive some of this is. So to recognize that we have had exceptional speakers and exceptional leaders, we have had exceptional resistance, we have had creativity and resistance. And so we have to constantly be asking ourselves how we are not doing the same thing. We have to constantly be pushing deeper to say, how is this different? How is this not the same? Learn from and stand on the shoulders of many of those who have sacrificed and paved the way. And what am I adding to this that is not the same? So when I think about St. Louis, I have a T-shirt that I actually was wearing at the museum, which was not planned, that says Missouri compromising since 1820. I think that and if you go to the hashtag Missouri coming, you'll find some of my posts. But this idea that we set ourselves up in a compromise as a state, that we have this constant tension between our urban centers and our rural, majority. We make a change in St. Louis, raise the minimum wage, something people are calling for, and the state says, nah, can't do that. So all the different ways in which that compromise and tension plays out in us today is important to realize. So St. Louis innovated. We were the first city who put to a public vote legal segregation. It was turned over, and then we started restrictive covenants. And that went on for a very long time. So we've innovated in ways in which we segregate and restrict access. And I believe that because it is so stark, because it is harder and harder to not deal with what we have made, that we are also in a unique position to innovate solutions. And I am hopeful that the critical mass of people who are kind of understanding what the true diagnosis is getting to the place where we will apply that innovation to solutions. I'm also realistic, so I continue to try to be specific, try to be truthful, and try to keep urgency in my ideas. There's often a criticism that we sit in rooms and theaters and have ideas and talk about them and are very smart and have lots of good quotes, but people are dying. This is life and death for some people. And so how do we keep that urgency and those feet on the ground and those lives on the ground in a forefront to how we are truthful and how we are innovative? I think that we are uniquely placed to do that as a city, and I'm hopeful that we will rise to the occasion.
You're so badass. I really...
No, you are.
You gotta read about her. She's amazing. The bell's gonna ding.
It's gonna ding. We're
We're
gonna
ahead
bring
of time. We won.
Yay!
You're amazing. Thank you. Who am I passing to?
Ryan.
Yes. Should we do a dance number really quick?
Here you go. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can't dance or sing. So we'll talk about
Do you have a secret
else.
theater background we need to discuss before we get going?
No.
Okay, just checking. So one of the things I learned about you last night that blew my mind and I thought was really pertinent to this conversation and this gathering is that the project that you're working on right now was your graduate thesis. And so tell me about what it's like to have something that you kind of ideated and focused on in that way over a period of almost a couple of decades, now be the thing that you are doing in your day-to-day life. And not just you, like an entire city and structure are coming together to make that thing reality.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I never imagined that we would actually build it. It was just, I wanted to graduate, which I did. The project is the Atlanta Beltline. It's a 22-mile loop of old railroads that we're repurposing for a transit line, greenway trail, economic development, community revitalization, public art. There's an arboretum. There's a public health component. There's all these different kinds of things, massive urban regeneration kind of project. And yeah, it started as my graduate thesis, and it really started as a movement of people. And so in the beginning, we built it around a grassroots movement of people that made it inclusive of everybody, and now we're holding it accountable to that. So yes, it's incredibly exciting to watch, and my kids are growing up with that as their worldview, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But also, the economic forces at play in Atlanta are pretty powerful, and there's a lot of people, who are vulnerable to those changes.
Yep. So you used a word that's one of my favorite words, which is accountability. And so what does that look like in this process of going from something that was very grassroots, bottom up, to something that now, as you were saying, has all of these sort of bigger economic interests in it? What does accountability look like in that process?
Well, for example, we had, because we were just a bunch of pipe dreamers who never really thought we would actually accomplish this vision, but were naive enough to engage in community and build this vision for ourselves and our future, it was inherently inclusive, and that means also that there were advocates for any number of different issues, housing and affordability and labor and economic opportunity and all those things. And so when we created the financing tools to start to fund it, we embedded that in it. So there's literally 15% of what's basically a tax increment finance district to help pay for the project. 15% of that goes to affordable housing. Now, what accountability looks like is that, yes, that money technically is there, but we're not using that money appropriately. And so it boils up to become an issue. The public has something that they can point to, a very specific kind of metric that they can look to and say, that's not working. And hold the city leadership accountable. And last year, the guy who's in charge got fired because of it. So there's some real accountability. Now, it's not in time for the people who have not been able to stay in their community.
So we talked a little bit about gentrification last night, and I had made the comment that I often feel that we kind of throw that word around, and that when you really look into, so when I was thinking about my small things that people can do, I was thinking about being specific. And when you talk about gentrification, there's so many layers to that. How have you experienced that complexity and or addressed some of those different layers in this process?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, the word gentrification, we were saying, is sort of, it's good shorthand because you can just say it and people kind of know what you're talking about. But also as really complex and a loaded term, it means different things to different people. It's much more helpful to be specific about what you're talking about. And again, because our project, this vision, was built around people who, inclusive sort of approach to people who care, it wasn't ever like we shouldn't do that because of gentrification. The issue of economic displacement and the separate issue of cultural displacement is certainly in there, but the answer wasn't to not build a project. The answer was to build a vision around something that actually includes those challenges. And so the financial tools to address economic displacement was built in. Now we need more. We're not doing nearly enough, but that's the kind of what that looks like, I think.
So you've used the word financial tools a number of times.
I only say that because I don't know financial tools. It sounds like people who know finance can figure that out.
They like think you don't know. Well, then maybe this isn't a good question, but no, I still think it is. Those are the types of real, tangible things that get in the way of a moonshot, of accountability, of grassroots-driven, change. How have you, or do you have somebody on the project, or how do you kind of translate and bridge bridge that between the passion and the real experience of people and the reality of how our financial tools are structured and what those limitations are?
Wow. I don't know. Well, there's lots of other challenges in addition to building, doing things. And so my approach to my work generally, and certainly what I learned in this process, because it's been a learning journey for me for sure, is that what's compelling about it, what gets people to do the hard work of it, is that there's a vision, there's some idea of where we're going, what we're going to be, what this adds up to, what our lives are all about, and that vision for this project is built around a really beautiful idea about how we're going to live together, how this thing is going to tie us together, how we're going to, this barrier, this old railroad, which is historically a barrier between places, now becomes a meeting ground. Literally in real life, people walk in and they meet each other. It's beautiful how it works. So if you have that vision and it's built on and articulated with a truly inclusive language that includes everybody, not just a beautiful vision for some people,
right.
Then you can follow up with all the details to make it work.
Yep.
And that's the problem starts when you start trying to answer those questions before you know what you're building.
Yes.
You know, if we had started the Beltline with how we were going to pay for it, we never would have done it.
No.
Never.
Nope.
We were proposing. It was a school project. You know, we're like proposing a big revolutionary idea on somebody else's land that we didn't own,
Yeah.
on a railroad that we had no money for, somebody else's money. You know, in a state that's hostile to all of the things that we were talking about politically. And you know, but we didn't start there. We started with our lives and what kind of lives we want.
Yeah. So what is your dream come true?
My dream come true is that the people who, that all of us and people who are willing to have this conversation and engage in it find themselves in positions of leadership and influence and power, so that the decisions about our future together get made by people who want that future. I get really frustrated by a lot of people in leadership, whether that's you know, the State Department of Transportation or elected officials or corporate leadership, or you know, your boss at some company making decisions, and they don't really even believe in your future. They don't believe in this sort of future that we're talking about. So I think that we have to do that. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that we talked a little bit about today, but I wanted to just sort of put a pin on, and you would certainly understand this in St. Louis, is that there's a physicality to this kind of love that we're talking about. You mentioned the zoning of different areas. I mean, when you talk about urban planning today, the mess of traffic and sprawl and all of this is a reflection of our values. It's a reflection of who we are. And so all the challenges, the structural racism and things that we're talking about, there's a physical mirror of that, and it looks like the mall. And and it was, you know, my grandparents in a small town in Louisiana, you know, because they were white, they got one of those fancy federal home loans that was only available to white people after World War II, and they moved out to the suburbs, and they built generational wealth for themselves and their family that translated when my parents moved to Atlanta to take advantage of all the booming economy that was a direct result of all those highways we were building. Yep. That's the world that I grew up in. And it was built specifically, an exclusive area for white people, but also for the economic prosperity of white people. And it worked for a long time. But it's not really working so much anymore because the world is changing. And as the world changes, we just have to be really vigilant to understand what that change looks like, who's going to be benefiting from the change. Because as you see the urbanization of cities, and Atlanta is definitely completely inverting itself, the inheritance of that unsustainable, isolated, very lonely, will come at somebody's expense.
Yes.
And it already is, and I think that there's a lot of complexity there, and I hope that everybody else is paying attention, and that the arts can be used as a way to illustrate that, and also to start to solve the challenges that it creates.
Yeah. I had a question for you about, I think in your bio it says the cultural side of infrastructure, but you answered it without me having to ask it.
Perfect.
And that was our bell, so
Yeah.
I think you're staying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello,
Got it.
welcome to the stage.
Hey, Ryan.
So, you have the distinction of being one of the last folks
I
in
am.
this.
I'm the before lunch, better than the after lunch. But today, I don't think anybody's going to go to sleep.
What have you taken the most from
Oh my
the
God,
conversation
I have
today?
been scrambling in the dark. You actually were sitting next to me, so you know that.
Yeah.
Partly because so many words were used by so many people.
Right.
So I'm Valerie Fletcher. I run the Institute for Human-Centered Design headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. We're a global nonprofit focused on the role of design in social equity. And I've taken pleasure for many years in always having another country I can play in because we're global, and sometimes that's been pretty desirable. I can pass as Canadian if I have to. These days, I find myself more and more compelled by being in the United States and being in a place where I really need to frame a sense of urgency, words used by many other people, worried very much about the echo. So I am focusing, certainly still globally, but I'm really focusing on my own country and my own city. We have converted in recent times from the use of the term universal design to inclusive design. Once upon a time, not so many months ago, we actually talked about diversity and inclusion as if we'd already sort of been around that game. And now it feels so threatened. And stretching out inclusion to include not only ability and age, which has been the tradition, we added culture 10 years ago, and now economic status.
So I come from my background is in architecture, and familiar with like the Americans with Disabilities Act and what design in that way looks like. But to update me on that, I mean, I'm used to that for universal design. But what do you mean by that, and how would your work manifest itself in the world?
We actually are totally devoted to the idea of design as a civil and a human right. Unfortunately, it's harder to make that pitch outside the U.S. right now than inside the U.S. But it's only a baseline. I'm very proud that we were the first place in the world that had those requirements, and they've been imitated across the globe now in about 180 other countries, very similar to what we've done, but it is no more than a minimum. It's a big vision about everybody, but the requirements are skimpy. And part of what I'm trying to get people to pay attention to is our bodies and brains and how much we have to create a context. So standards have their place, codes have their place, but a vision of designing a context. Designers are the context makers, designers of all kinds. And it's that idea that that context is either going to isolate us and eliminate us and constrain us, or it's going to facilitate us. And that's the built environment and the physical environment of all kinds and the digital environment.
And so how does that overlay? You mentioned social equities, and we've talked a lot about racial equity here too also. How does those two things kind of layer in?
It's where, for my nickel, people like you have actually offered some good alternative stories. I have to share with you that last Wednesday night, I did a college-wide lecture at the Boston Architectural College, and I was talking about the built environment and the need for attention to consequential innovation. We've sort of given innovation away as if it were digital only, and I used a number of people, and I loved using you and the story of the Beltline and the big story of where Atlanta's going now, really framing the future in terms of the things that we care about. And Atlanta represents the story that you facilitated, kicked off an opportunity for physical connection, which I am still really, really worried about. And in my town, we have a brand new district called the Innovation District. It's the whitest community that we have ever created. Hands down, no debate, and we are a 55% minority city. This will not change without enormous investment of ideas, of infiltration of what's already underway. Talking nice won't cut it.
It does seem like we're really missing out on a lot of opportunity. We don't have the physical space to come together. There's no, in a lot of cities, especially in the outlying parts of cities.
We're actually funding, one of the places that we're funding are resonant for a lot of people because they're affordable, are the in-between places. Forget the suburbs, and the city is too costly, it's alienated too many people, it isolates and it's too expensive. But the in-between places, the places that used to have, the storage lockers and the giant warehouses are turning into places that have some hope. But I think part of what I'm really concerned about is to infiltrate big efforts that are going on. We have 1,100 brand new neighbors over the last 2 months in my building. We work, and we find them not terribly interested in this vision. Very concerned with pitching their own big ideas, desperately holding on to this can be successful, this is the big idea, while many of them are actually suffering from depression and anxiety and loneliness. But that is a culture that we are we are supporting and promoting and lending a whole lot of money to every day.
How can we do a better job?
I think we have to infiltrate it. I think we have to do that partly by getting a whole lot of people who aren't the usual players to be involved. And part of it is to bring a message of art as a visceral, vulnerable, necessary part of life to people who believe in a very dangerous way that success is about control. Talk about echo. We cannot go there again. Success is not about control.
So one of the prompts is, what does success look like for you? What is that? If it's not control.
I think there's a level of literal physical connection, which is part of what I love about what you did in Atlanta, what you dreamed in Atlanta. It was that people would bump up against each other, and they would get involved in the lantern. Maybe other people did that, but the lantern parade is a great story of connection. And stirring up diversity of human experience. We are moving in the innovation world towards solving harder problems. It used to be okay if we just connected people who were like one another. That's no longer where we are. My town is turning into the #1 innovation hub in America. This is an opportunity to say, if we're going to solve the harder problems, we need people who've lived different lives, who know different truths, and to make ourselves vulnerable to work together to figure that out. It's not good enough for 24-year-old white guys to figure it out.
Well, and you have to start to question whether it is the #1 innovation hub in America. If that's what it is, if that's what innovation looks like, that might not be.
It's a job for the whole country.
Right. Yeah,
as
sure.
we see more and more people competing for it, more and more people, unfortunately, looking a lot like it's always looked.
The lantern parade that she references, this idea this crazy woman had. I say crazy with love because she's just awesome and we're all kind of crazy, but that people would make homemade lanterns and walk down the trail in the dark. And the first year there were 200 people, the next year there were 400 people, then 800, then 1,200. The next year there were 12,000 people, then 20,000, then 60,000.
60,000
last
last year,
September, 80,000 people.
80,000.
Yeah,
And you have to make your own lantern.
Yeah.
You
And
can't
literally
borrow
just
one.
people making homemade lanterns carrying down in the dark. And it illustrates this pent-up demand for a cultural life in the city that wouldn't have happened without that 2-mile slab of concrete.
Part of what I think you tapped into is something that I'm constantly trying to figure out how to tap into, is that people are really hungry for real stuff.
They really are.
Yeah.
It's ironic, isn't it, that in this digital age where you can live anywhere, that people want to be together more, but we don't have the physical places for them to go. A lot of cities do because they're built on a legacy of more investment in public space. But the regional connectivity, and especially as our populations shift due to economic forces and other kinds of forces, it's a real challenge.
And I think we have to find a language that a lot of people today have talked about, a language for telling stories about our differences as well as how we're alike. And I think that's central to getting to the hard stuff. We've got to figure out how to do that. And if I had one thing that I'd love to see, it's a recognition that it won't happen without an investment. I don't know if you guys are looking at it, but one of the things that gags me on a regular basis, maybe I read too much of Wired and other tech magazines, but if I read about one more gazillionaire who is investing all of his money in immortality, I'd love an opportunity to suggest that our mortal beings actually need a whole lot of help, and that we could actually have richer lives for everybody instead of him saving himself for a failed eternity.
Amen to that. I think we leave it on immortality probably, but that's great. Thank you.
Let's hear it again for Matt, Nicole, Ryan, and Valerie. I'm really excited for our next performance, which is a symphony of water bottles hitting the floor. Thank you. Please excuse me for not putting that in the program book. This is, wow, I'm, what a morning. And this particular moment is my highlight, I have to say, because all the conversations that we just had this morning, we're going to talk about some individuals who actually live and breathe the work that's going to move us forward on these issues and concerns. So we're going to transition to a conversation, an introduction of our Citizen Artist Fellows. We are so proud of this program now in its third year. These are artists who live and work in communities all over the country and really live up to what we call our Kennedy ideals of service, justice, freedom, courage, and gratitude. And these are artists that live up to those every day and really give back through their artistic means and powers and performances. So we'd like to first acknowledge our first cohort. We have a number of our friends in the house. I'm going to ask them to stand, and we're going to give them a little love. So I know that CJ Phillip, Monica Eunice, Camille Zamora, and I believe Yoko Sen and Paige Hernandez are in the audience. So I would just like to give them a round of applause. We had some of the most honest conversations I've ever had in my professional career about what this fellowship and relationship should look like, and we absolutely stand on your shoulders, and thank you for your contributions in designing the next steps forward. So it is now time to celebrate and hear about the 17-18 cohort, and please enjoy this little video.
Oh my gosh. Is this playtime?
Isn't it always?
Yep.
Kennedy Center Citizen Artist Fellows program is really built around the legacy of President Kennedy. These ideals of service, justice, freedom, courage, and gratitude. How do artists across the country and the world live up to those ideals and give back to their community? And so this idea of citizen artistry is really what emerged. We looked for artists around the country that were working in communities, both large and small, that really use their art form for good, for giving back to their community, for building community. Artist and activist Dee Nichols from St. Louis.
A citizen artist is simply someone who is using the talents to impact the world and especially civic life within the communities and spaces that they live in.
Good morning, friends. I need your help to be more consistent, holding me accountable to creating at least one thing a day.
All of us have that capacity, that ability to see both, see the paradoxes, to see the opportunities all at once. But I think it takes us doing regular check-ins to say, how are we going to be more intentional?
Big personalities require high emotional intelligence.
With the Kennedy Center, we can really amplify the efforts that we're already creating.
Dressed in a business suit, not sure what to do, not sure of who I would find.
I believe that everyone is born with a gift, and by engaging with my work, hopefully someone else can unlock theirs.
To provoke, to make us question who we really are, and why are we separating ourselves? Why are we judging each other?
These four walls could be the biggest obstacles to you because the real classroom has a ceiling of clouds. And sometimes it has walls of injustice and windows of misperception, but it's got a ground. And you've got 2 feet, so you can always walk, wheel, or fly your way to another lesson. And that's what they taught me.
Artist at its core is somebody who is creating work for other people. Therefore, it is inherently communal, it is inherently collective and community oriented.
I just appreciate that, when I'm going through the daily bread of being a parent and the daily bread of writing poems, that there are people that are working on this 24/7 because the clock is ticking.
I feel like I'm trying to say what other people are feeling. That's what I'm really trying to do. In this world, we're so separated. We're all like little holodecks and our little bodies cruising on a rock through space. And then in a poem or in a song or in a movie or in a painting, you can go, that person knows exactly how I feel. That's a special moment. Fold all 10 or so of your fingers and embrace the person next to you, because an open hand is the same size as an open seat, if it's you. And if the truth is true, then it's most definitely you. These are hallowed spaces in our society. They're held in such esteem for excellence in the arts. And it's nice to be recognized as a part of it. It's even nicer to be recognized as excellent as a human, as opposed to just excellence in aesthetics or performance or in the arts.
Noble sacrifice of a profession. I was no teacher. I was just a lesson. Can't even call myself a good learner, but I learn. Have learned and still do. But now, the classrooms are different.
What makes me a citizen artist is that I can think about things about what it means to be a citizen, and to understand that to be a citizen is not just about documentation, but also about participation and production. New York City subways are where a lot of these different cultures come together, and that's where they intersect. I thought that this sort of intersection of culture should happen more in our public spaces and plazas. Looking at this poll, it's very interesting because a poll can also bring people together. And what if I created a poll that when everyone connected it, say it used your body as a conductor, and you could hold on to one pole and I would hold on to another one, and then I myself, my body using my body, would connect two things and activate something. What drives the work is seeing that there are so many underreported stories that need to be told in the news, and thinking of ways to use art to bridge the gap between those stories in the news.
When I see the news, they're only showing a subject that they want you to focus on. They're not showing this system.
El Sistema is the movement of classical music for social change that started in Venezuela in the 1970s and has now expanded worldwide. El Sistema USA is the embodiment of what I have always searched for, which is giving voice to anyone who has an interest in exploring the talent and potential inside them.
Maestro Abreu is the founder of El Sistema. One of the things he said was that you're too late if you're not starting now. And none of the preparation in the world will prepare you for a perfect response. And so it's most important that you begin.
I passionately believe that all people, no matter their social or economic situation, should have the opportunity to seize the capacity for creativity and performance that is inside of them.
Gathering our collective strength.
I think that my path as a citizen artist will always be about bringing people together.
Citizen artists have a role to heal our nation, but we also have a responsibility to provoke and to disrupt and to start conversations that may not be happening right now.
How do we create a platform and a pathway from arts engagement to civic engagement?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute honor to welcome you to this third Messiah project.
We are presenting excerpts of Handel's beloved Messiah alongside a series of pieces of music which tell the story of people who experience homelessness and poverty in Los Angeles today.
Never in a million years did I think that I would be singing along with members of the LA Phil and the Master Chorale.
I came down here on drugs and alcohol, and now it's come full circle, and just overwhelming.
When I came here 3 years ago, I had a month clean from a heroin addiction. So today I celebrate the resilience of your ever-expanding souls
when we actually make the space as artists to let formerly and currently disenfranchised people step into an artistic space, we find that folks have access to creative agency, to resilience, to courage, and to making really, really great art.
This is a neighborhood. This is a place where the stories and lives of people matter. And we are here to make music with those stories.
Everything I do as a composer and as a musician and as an artist is really based on the relationships that I form and that I have with people. When I see the news is like, I try to find the person that I want to antagonize the most and think like, what do I have in common with this person? I think so much of our training as musicians has to do with just playing the notes on the page, or how well we play the notes on the page, I'll say. I think we can go so far beyond that into our own humanity and into our shared humanity. That's the role that we can have as not just artists, but as citizen artists.
Take a moment. Take a breath. Take time. Take what you need.
Those of us who are here are just representatives of what is possible for the arts in general.
A citizen artist, to me, is an artist that is very much aware not just about artistic practice, but is very much aware of the issues that are relevant in our society. My work is focused on telling the stories of the community through public spaces and using public spaces as a platform to create awareness and educate folks on the issues that the communities are dealing with. It is here in this neighborhood where my parents decided to have our home and where I was raised and where I continue to live. And I think it's also a sense of having this open air market that is a memory of home when you're so far away from home. The communities that I've been connecting with are so much at risk and on attack. If I were to be spending any of my energy, it would be focused on working with them and representing their narratives, which means there's very little energy to deal with the opposer. In my case, what I try to do, and it's been my mantra, is creating work that is both poetic and powerful, and how to do that in a way that moves beyond than just being a work of art, but really brings this connection to our humanity.
The Kennedy Center has such a richness of people with different perspectives and connections and resources, and sharing those with local artists, young artists like myself, it's so selfless.
We talked to them about their local impact as well as what their potential collective impact could be across the country.
Collective voice of gathering together and seeking something really does have that impact.
We have our one-on-ones with different departments across the Kennedy Center.
Sometimes, especially in these conversations, getting after that way of how they organize themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, just a regular letter, but and I like to have white space in the letter. I like to have bullets, so it's very easy to read.
I love also this idea of a living, breathing memorial.
We collectively and through our artists can change the world through art.
The ideas that are being sparked, the resources that are being shared, the connections that we're making with really awesome members of the team here.
Having the support of the Kennedy Center is just really amazing.
This is the national stage.
To be able to have a conversation with someone who has had such a broad life experience as Yo-Yo Ma has had.
All that diversity gives us the tools to survive.
And to have him lead us in a conversation of ideas about humanity.
The bottom line is humanity. That's, I think, part of our job.
Yo-Yo really challenged us to think both about okay, you can do your work, and the work is important, but you've got to always be thoughtful about the bigger picture.
This is a photo of our little planet from there. It's a wave. Hello.
So, as you can see, these are some pretty amazing individuals, and I believe we've grown some really strong bonds over the past year. I can't believe it's gone so fast. You know, as the Kennedy Center, we really value the role of the artist, and especially these citizen artists, and we really think about them as superheroes. So in honor to recognize you, and Deborah, please come up and join me, we have a special gift. So I'm gonna reveal the gift, and then we're gonna invite you all up. So we had these tailor-made for you, the big reveal. So, please join me in welcoming up Dee, Katie, Rena, Akene, Michelle, and Hakeem.
So cool.
Yep. So wait, stay right there.
Okay.
Stay right there.
Hold
on.
Oh. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
All right, we got it. Oh, sorry. And you want to hold DJs? All right. Okay, guys. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Woo!
Yeah. We also want to call out that in your program books, we have these beautiful reflections that they offer to us from their year experience. So please make sure you read those. And we also send our love and gratitude to Vijay Gupta, who couldn't join us today, but he's here with us always in spirit. So once again, we honor you. And so now, we would like to introduce our 1819 cohort. Enjoy.
Based in Boston, violinist and composer Sha Pong Liu works to engage diverse communities in music and meaningful conversation. She is a founding member of Play for Justice, a network of musicians and artists supporting social justice causes. In 2016, as an artist in residence for the city of Boston, she began Code Listen, which uses music to support healing and dialogue around gun violence, race, and law enforcement in collaboration with the Boston Police Department, local musicians, teen artists, and family members surviving homicides. Her current work also includes Sing Home, a project that gathers and shares songs from Boston's Chinatown community to create new compositions as a way to start conversations about immigration, neighborhood, and cultural and civic identity. Donnie Rose. Donnie Rose is a community activist, educator, and active member of the poetry scene in his native Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He is the marketing director for Forward Arts, a youth poetry organization that serves more than 3,000 youth in the Baton Rouge area through in-school creative writing workshops, open mics, poetry slams, and a youth poet laureate program. Using his art form to address racial inequality, Donnie has been part of the spoken word and slam circuit for over 15 years and has facilitated spoken word events for youth for over a decade. Through his work and art, Donnie helps youth find their voice in a racially and ecumenically divided Baton Rouge. Justice Harris. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 14, Justice Harris has combined his experience as a patient with his skill as a technologist and artist to advance medical literacy and improve patient care in his Chicago community. Justice is the founder of Medsculpt, which produces educational content featuring data-driven visual artworks and designs that help people with diabetes who struggle with conventional explanations of how to treat and understand their disease. Justice is an active member of the Chicago entrepreneurship, media, and arts communities where he mentors artists to create sustainable professional lives. Rulon Tongan has worked tirelessly to inspire a new generation of Indigenous performers to express their culture in vital contemporary and experimental art forms. She is the founder, choreographer, and featured dancer in The Dancing Earth, a company whose work has been described as rooted in the spirit and energy of the First Peoples and the land. Rulon engages community through intergenerational dance training workshops and full-length theater productions, and she teaches extensively in Native communities across the Americas. Based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and San Francisco, California, the company tackles themes that reflect contemporary Native people, such as nature, transformation, and decolonization. Omar Offendum. Omar Offendum is a Syrian-American rapper and a poet raised in Washington, D.C. and who lives in Los Angeles. He first felt a strong connection with rap while studying Arabic poetry, which he describes as the backbone of the Arabic language. As an entertainer and activist, Omar has been able to speak to diverse global audiences over his decade-long career. He tours the world performing at international music festivals, lecturing at major academic institutions, and fundraising for humanitarian relief organizations. His first solo album, Syrian Americana, was released in 2011.
You want to come and join me first? Come on out. Yep. Great. Yeah.
Great video.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah. We'll let them have one and then we'll pop in.
Yeah.
Great. And then we're gonna pop in on
There
one.
you go.
There we go. Group hug. Group hug. Group hug. There you go.
All right.
Here, congratulations.
Bravo. Okay.
All right, group shot. Here we go. Thank you. Congratulations, everyone. Welcome to the family. Yep.
You're stuck with us now.
The way the fellowship is set up is that it's bookended by the Art Summit. So this is the Art Summit where they're introduced. Please connect with them throughout the day, ask questions, get to know them. They'll engage with us throughout the year in conversation and learning and exchange. We come together in the middle of the year for a retreat. We open up the Kennedy Center's resources and experts and artists to help them address critical issues that they want to tackle. And then the second half of the year, we really spend looking towards the next summit to figure out how they might share their learning, their findings, their experience, just like this outgoing cohort has done today. So we welcome you and thank you so much. Yes. All right, a few brass tacks as we wrap up the morning and get ready for the afternoon. You'll see on the screen there will be some details about the agenda. So during lunch, once again, I just want to remind folks that we're going to be doing a food spark, as well as have Michelle's interactive piece out near registration. So please be sure to do that. As you go into the atrium for lunch, be sure to pick up your box lunch. And we want to make sure that you're paying attention to your name badge, because that'll tell you where to sit in the atrium for lunch. So as you can see on the screen, you'll see a number and a letter, and that'll correspond to the table that you're sitting at. Also, for after lunch, when you go to your one of 3 breakout sessions, you can see they're color-coded here on the screen. And so your name badge is also color-coded to tell you, are you going to green for resources in the theater lab, which is right here, purple for health, which is in the terrace gallery, or blue for education, which is in the terrace theater. All of those spaces are on this floor, and there are folks to help you find your way throughout the entire day. We encourage you to do your best to be on time. Our breakouts for the afternoon promptly start at 1:45. I suggest a 1:40 arrival if you can swing it. And we encourage you to make as many connections friends, colleagues, and new faces as possible. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you later.